Welcome to the first ever Paper Street Pictures Movie Talk Roundtable. I am your host, Cinemechanic. This is a new YouTube series we're excited to launch where we feature interesting guests talking everything movies, whether it be a franchise or a particular solo film. And today, with the recent release with Scream 5 and the announcement of Scream 6, of course, we felt it would be a good one to launch the series with. So today I'm joined by two fantastic people. First guest is Jolene Richardson, who is a costume designer and fashion historian. Her work can be seen on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs and in the upcoming Paper Street Pictures film, Scare Package 2. She has a website and a really cool movie blog called Hanging by a Thread and a podcast called To Die For. That's D-Y-E and not D-I-E. Some clever wordplay there. And Michael Moreci, who is a film and comic book writer. Michael recently penned the horror film called Revealer, which you'll be able to check out this year. And he's done some really cool comic books, everything from Star Wars to The Flash to Battlestar Galactica and Heavy Metal, many, many more. Michael and Jolene's social media and website info will be left in the description of this video. So check them out when you get a chance. They do great work. So welcome, guys.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. It's thrilled to be here.
Cool. Yeah. So you guys are pretty big Scream fans, I take it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's why you're here. So I kind of want to dive into the first movie and talk a little bit about, initially what our sort of end to the Scream franchise was. Mine was literally going to see the original film when I was a teenager. I don't remember if I just saw the trailer and wanted to go see it, or if a friend said, say, go see Scream. But I remember being in the auditorium with a bunch of other people and just watching this incredible horror film. I was a big horror fan, but had never seen anything like that. This sort of meta take on horror and all the rules. And I was kind of aware of these rules on a subconscious level about certain things that characters did before they died, but I'd never seen a movie encapsulate all that and put it in one film and actually give it more context and make fun of it. And on the surface, it's a really scary horror movie, but it's also got these really cool meta takes underneath. And yeah, I don't know, it just became a huge phenomenon, and me and my friends loved it, and I've been a fan of the series ever since. So how about you guys? What's your intro into the Scream franchise?
Jolene, if you want to go, I'll defer.
I'm trying to think when the first time I saw the movie was, because I don't think I truly remember the first time I saw the movie. I was too young to go to theaters, but I remember I don't know if you guys remember on A&E, there was that, or was it AMC? There was that 100 greatest, scariest movie moment countdown that they used to do every October. So I remember Drew Barrymore's scene in that show. And then I remember seeing Scary Movie. So I think I saw Scary Movie first, and then finally saw Scream and was like, oh, okay. And just, it completely changed the way I looked at, horror and genre films and Final Girls and everything. And because I loved Nightmare on Elm Street, I loved Halloween, I loved all those movies. So to continue that, and I love Wes Craven too. But yeah, I can't pinpoint the exact moment or year that I saw Scream.
Yeah, I think I'm similar, Farrell. I think I'm similar to you. I remember seeing in the theater. I was trying to pinpoint who I went with, because I remember seeing Scream 2 with my brother, and that being like a huge deal, because by that time, when I saw Scream 1 was just Scream, it wasn't what it became. Scream 2 then became an event, and I remember seeing that, my brother and I going, and it being just such a big deal. But yeah, the first time I saw it, I was less aware. I had to have been 16 at the time. And I had to be less aware, of the meta commentary. But I remember just seeing it and being like, part of what I love about it, and still love to this day, and I just rewatched it this morning, is like, it's such a cool, like, Wes Craven being like, hey, you remember how horror movies, because we were coming out of like the early 90s, horror is not in a great place. It's really serious. It's really dark. It's kind of icky. And nobody really knows what to do with horror at that time. And then Wes comes along after New Nightmare, which is, it's hard not to talk about Scream without New Nightmare, because New Nightmare kind of is the template of the meta thing. It's even, I think, more meta than Scream is, but But he's like, hey, remember when horror used to be really fun and cool and effective? I'm going to remind you. And I feel like he made a fun, cool horror movie. Just that's just the foundation of Scream. And then I'm going to talk about why horror is really fun and cool and scary and all these great things while I'm doing the thing at the same time. And I think, you know, we'll talk about this. I think that's something that the sequels lose progressively, movie by movie. But like it was just Wes fundamentally was like, I'm gonna make this cool horror movie, and then we're gonna go from there. And then like making that layer of like, yeah, obviously with coming too, of like why horror is cool and stuff. And it's just so priceless and timeless and perfect.
Yeah, speaking of Craven, originally there was like a bidding war for the scripts. To get kind of a background is the writer Kevin Williamson was, I think he'd had a bit of a career at that point, but he was kind of struggling to pay his bills, and he wanted to sell a script, and he was staying at a friend's house, and he was kind of worried about robbers breaking in and, I don't know, tying him up or something. He had this really severe fear of that, and he sort of channeled all that into this outline, and then he wrote a script, and there was a bidding war for it. And then actually Wes Craven wanted the studio to buy it for him because he wanted to direct it, but apparently it had already been bought by Dimension Films. And I don't know if Dimension approached him or if he approached them, but eventually, you know, Craven ended up directing the movie. But he obviously saw what we all see in it, you know, in the script form, and which is, it's interesting because I think the studio kind of asked Craven, so what do you think? Do you think this is a sort of a funny movie that's with scares in it, or do you think it's a scary movie that has sort of jokes in it? He says, oh, no, this is a horror movie. This is a scary, you know, hardcore horror film that has comedy. And the comedy comes out of the fact that when you go see a horror movie, especially in the 90s, you know, it's so easy to yell at the screen and kind of go, why are you doing this? Why, you know, and the audience was so aware of all these like crazy things and these rules, and they would yell them out. If you go to cinemas, like I remember going to see, when I was a kid, I went to see, my sisters took me to see Nightmare on Elm Street 5. And, you know, I mean, I was really young, but I just remember people like yelling at the screen, like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing this? And Craven, I think he understood that and turned in him and Williamson, they turned that into comedy. And you laugh at it because it's like, it's so true. And it's like, they're making fun of it, but the characters in the movie are also aware of these rules as well, but they're also breaking these rules too. So it's like one of the great scenes is, and we'll talk about this in a minute, Sydney's on the phone and she's talking to the killer, and he's like, oh yeah, you know, I don't watch that because it's just stupid. Some girls, you know, running up the stairs when she'd be going out the front door, and then, you know, 2 minutes later she's running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. And it's great. Yeah. I wanted to actually though talk a little bit about the opening sequence with Drew Barrymore, because that's obviously a pretty big thing. That was, you know, it's hard to kind of contextualize this and remember it when I was younger. It's just that when it came out, everybody knew Drew Barrymore. She was, you know, E.T., you know, she had actually had some sort of bad girl phase where she was, you know, getting in trouble and things like this. And her career was kind of a bit on the downswing, but she was still really famous. So when I saw Drew Barrymore, I was like, oh shit, that's Drew Barrymore from E.T. And, you know, I saw her in some other movies, and oh, they're not going to kill her. She's probably going to be the main character, and they kill her. And it's almost like a short film because the way it's constructed. And I think this is something that the other films lack, is there's a very deliberate pacing and a very deliberate kind of focus on suspense, and you sort of building on this, you know, she's home by herself. This random guy calls her. They're a little bit flirty at first, which is great, and then it sort of turns sadistic, and then, you know, he's terrorizing her, and the fear that she was able to capture in that scene was incredible. I remember rewatching it and seeing the other films, and that same fear. I don't know. It's just there's something about it that was just so visceral and real. And there's some great stuff, like there's a Psycho callback, which, you know, obviously the movie Psycho with that Alfred Hitchcock made, in the shower scene where Marion Crane is murdered, and that was a huge shock in 1960. This is obviously a play on that, which is great. There's a really cool shot that I really like, where she's on the phone initially talking to the guy, hey, we've got 900 numbers for that, because they're being very flirty, and the camera kind of moves to the window and puts her in a profile, and the window's in the background. And then she leaves a shot, and then you see this sort of window in the background, which later on her boyfriend is going to be behind that glass and killed. So just little subtle things like that that Craven builds throughout the sequence. So I want to talk a little bit about that. What you guys think about the opening overall?
Yeah, I mean, if I can go, it's funny. That's very much on my mind. It's always on your mind when you talk about the Scream franchise. And it's like, it's funny, and I'm glad you mentioned those things, Farrell, because yeah, it's totally surprising. And it's designed to be like Drew Barrymore's the star, and then she gets killed. It's the whole Psycho, like, even though, Psycho happened later, in the film, like it's that surprise element. But if you even now that we don't know, now that we know that, that's just, common, we all know the language of that movie, that's how it's going to open. 5 kind of subverted it, but yeah. But like, it's also a masterclass of suspense. Like, Craven directs that sequence, and it shouldn't be surprising because he's one of the best, if not the best, but it's such a great sequence. You start outside, and you go through the trees. It's this whole, and Craven does this again and again in the Scream movies, the whole voyeuristic thing. You start outside, you get a sense of this, the expanse. You see the house, you see there's nothing else around. It's dark, there's the mist on the pool. You penetrate into the house with the phone call, so you're right there with the killer going into the house via the phone. You have the great sequences and the back and forth that you describe. He shows you everything that's going to come into play, the smoking popcorn, like you said, the profile that's going to be with the boyfriend, that she turns on the light once and he's not there, then she turns on again and he is, like, all of these things. The visual language of that, whatever, 7-8 minute sequence is so impeccable and so perfect. Like, and it's funny because it gets like kind of missed because like everyone talks about how shocking it is, and Drew Barrymore's performance is excellent. Like, the moment where it's like the 4th or 5th time the phone rings and she just jolts at it, and it couldn't have been more perfect. And it's just an immaculately pristine sequence that, like, it's joyful to watch how good it is every single time.
I agree. Jolene?
Yeah, it's a classic scene for a reason. And when I look at that scene now as a costume designer, I love, like, the contrast between what Drew Barrymore is in versus when we see Ghostface and when we see her boyfriend. And there's a lot of this throughout the Scream movie too, but Cynthia Bergstrom, who's the costume designer, she put her in just very innocent creams and these knitted sweaters and these really nice light purple Fred Segal pants. And she looks like the girl next door. And I knew when I was growing up as a teenager and I was home alone and you get weird phone calls, you're like, am I being watched? And I think this movie definitely probably scared a whole generation of teenage girls being home alone, on a Saturday night or something, and their parents are out. But it's the idea of a lamb being led to slaughter almost, because, you read those fan theories that this kill might have been done by Stu because she left him for this other guy that he kills in front of her. So there's that textual element of her sweater and this innocence of her haircut and all of these, like, she doesn't have a lot of makeup on. She's very pristine and pure. And yet she's being hit with questions. She's being hit with this violence coming from the other side of the phone that builds up into this physical violence where she's literally being chased through the lawn. And then, like, and then her parents come home and it just rips your heart out to watch her mother discover this. And, like, that is just, yeah, it gives you chills when you think about it, when you watch it, and it works.
Yeah. No, you guys all hit on some great points, and I'm really glad you brought some costume knowledge to this, which is why we were excited to have you on. Because these things I don't, the great thing about movies is these design elements are usually subconscious. I mean, the audience isn't aware of these things, but you can tailor make certain thematic things to, affect an audience on a subconscious level. They're not even aware of these things, but they're like, it could be like, why am I feeling so off or weird or, tense? But yeah, so, and it's great, but then like it's shocking. And then you go to this, humble little Sidney Prescott. She's sitting there at a computer typing. And the great thing about that scene in the bedroom is there are so many things that Craven wanting some setup for later. Tons of things in this one sequence. There's that door where, you know, her dad comes in, and you know, the closet door opens and it stops the main door from opening. That's going to be something that plays later. There's the fact that she's a virgin, and, you know, and Billy has been semi-pressuring her to, you know, give up her virginity, which is going to play out later. There's the dad element, which is, you know, the dad's going to become a suspect and he's going out of town and all these things. And there's this great, the thing, and you know, when you watch these horror movies, you see these soundtrack selections, these sort of, you know, pop music type things. And in this one, there's a cover song, and it sounds very cute and innocent, and, you know, all, you know, they're this young innocent teenage couple. But this song that they're playing is actually called "Don't Fear the Reaper" by Blue Oyster Cult, and it's actually a song about death. It's actually a song about I think the lead singer was singing about him dying at a young age. And this, and you know, in it, it's a cover version, and it sounds like, oh, you know, oh, it's this delicate, nice, cute song, but underneath it, it's actually about death, and it's foreshadowing the fact that Billy is one of the killers. So that's this scene, yeah, and there's not a wasted space in this movie, and I kind of want to talk about this scene because there's so many things that are set up like that. And I love Sydney's acting when Billy goes out the window and he leaves. There's this moment that Craven takes, you know, just a few beats that most horror movies just would not put in, where Sydney, she's kind of looking like you know, she's almost feeling guilty, or she's feeling strange, and you don't really know what it is at the time, and, you know, you may never know what it is, but he takes a little acting beat off of her when he leaves that most horror movies just don't include. And I think that's what separates Scream from a lot of other horror films, is that Craven takes the time to set these sort of acting moments up, so that builds and makes the film actually a little bit more relevant. So I don't know, what do you guys think of this scene?
I love this scene. It, like, you know, all those things that you said where it's setting them up. I love when directors and designers can use those subtle things, like what are they like, especially in classrooms, like what are they reading in the classroom and how it relates to, or the books on the shelves and how they relate to the overall theme, and this music relates to the overall theme of the film. One of why Wes Craven is one of my favorite filmmakers personally is because I love his portrayal of women. They are very real, they are complex, they are flawed, and yet there is like still an innocence to them and a realness to that. And I wonder if that's because, and I've read interviews where he said that, like, because he has daughters and his daughters were watching these movies, they always ask him, like, oh, please don't make her fall, or don't make her. So I feel like there's never gratuitous nudity in his movies. Like, you never feel uncomfortable for these women, and they do end up strong. And in that, this scene in particular showcases that, where we don't see the nudity of Sydney, and it's kept PG for our eyes in that moment. And yeah, that just, you know, her relationship with Billy in that way is like, because she's gone through that trauma, she's, you know, she wants to love him, but she's keeping him at an arm's length, but there's still a strength there that she's trying to see, you know, she sees the good in him and she loves him. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything you said, Farrell. Like, and that's stuff that I love personally as a storyteller. Like, and we've talked about this. Like, I love clarity. Like, I love movies, shows, everything that announces themselves like right away. Like, you understand what this is. You know, one thing I always point to is Justified. Timothy Olyphant, a friend from Scream 2, who you know, the first 5 minutes of Justified, for example, you know exactly what that show is going to be, the tone, the character, everything. And this is such a great job between the intro, that's like, we're telling you, we're upending expectations. And this scene is telling you Billy's the killer. Like, it's clearly telling you. Well, the one thing it doesn't tell you that keeps the mystery going is why. Because he says, like, you know, when we started off, we were hot and heavy, and now we're just kind of PG-13, failing to mention that in between, her mom was murdered, you know, like, right. and that's the whole motivation. So that's the one thing that Billy leaves out because he's such a dick. And also, it's like the one thing that he omits because it would reveal his motivation. That's the only missing piece of this puzzle. Like, and it goes into how tight the script is. Like, everything that happens, you know, like, he's going there for an alibi. It's the only reason he's going there is so he can be like, I was with you last night. And, you know, you get that. I mean, I think, I'm not sure who it was that you never clear. It could have been either one of them killed Drew Barrymore. Either are kind of plausible, but like, you know, Jolene, you had mentioned like, we learned later that Drew Barrymore's character dated Matthew Lillard's character, and there's motivation for why she was chosen, and the principal, like, you have really clear reasons why the people are chosen. Then ultimately you get to Sydney. I mean, there's some chaotic murders that happen along the way, but like you get why these things are happening. And it's just so absolutely such a good script and so well done by Wes Craven. And that goes into also the visual stuff, like that door, you know, the window that comes into play in the later chase scene, and her computer, like he's visually shows you, it's so great. He shows you all the things visually that are going to happen in the next scene or at the end or whatever the case may be. And he's just balancing a tight script with visual mastery. And it's so good.
Yeah,
I just want to point out another. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
I just want to point out another visual. So I love sleepwear and horror. Like that's one of my favorite things. I think the symbolism behind sleepwear is really interesting to me. And so what is really clever about this scene is that they're talking about the exorcist, and she's wearing a nightgown that's similar to Reagan's, where you have the eyelets and it's got floral patterns on it, and it's a nightgown, and nightgowns are very vulnerable for women as opposed to like a sleep set with pants and a top. And you know, and Billy is pressuring her, and she's vulnerable because she doesn't have pants on, you know. And then on the floral motif are roses, and I love when people use roses for Final Girls because they're delicate, they're pretty, but they have thorns and they fight back against nature. And I love that they use that motif with Sydney because she does sting him at the end. That was just another visual that I love about that scene.
And also, sorry to keep going with Farrell's point. I mentioned like the Don't Fear the Reaper, when they're making out in the bed, the scene, the part that's playing is Baby I'm Your Man. Like they say like 3 times. Like, and that's the great thing is like, that's what's so, it's the Hitchcock rule, is like, if you know there's a bomb under the table, that's suspense. Like if the bomb just explodes, you don't know it's there. That's surprise, and that's something different. But like maybe you didn't know at the time, but like everything subconsciously that the movie's putting into your brain by literally saying "Baby, I'm your man," like is, which can be taken one of 2 ways. So it's not hitting you over the head, but like it's just creating suspense. It's the bomb under the table, and you might not totally see it, but you're starting to see it. You're like, and you know, Billy becomes a suspect, and he's not, but like, you know, like this is the guy, you know, and it's just so well done, start to finish.
Yeah, I agree. I really love how they reveal the situation with Sydney's mom. They do that in a very subtle fashion through several sequences in the first act. It really starts at the school. And I love when they get to the school because it's this big crane shot and it comes down. It's like 2 shots. It's like goes to Sydney, and then we see Sydney and we see Gail, and then Tatum comes in, and then they walk into the school. It's like 2 shots. And it shows just how much of a mastery that Craven has over the visual language of cinema. But there's, over these visuals, there's this very, very subtle emotional thing going on with Sydney's mom in the reveal, because first of all, Gail, when she sees Gail, and you can see Sydney kind of, you know, stopping her tracks. You don't know why, but Gail is sort of a key figure in, you know, the situation that happened with Sydney's mom, because, you know, she wrote a book and, you know, basically said, oh, Cotton Weary was innocent and all this stuff. And then they go into the school, and then, you know, there's this interrogation scene where there's the sheriff, and then we introduce Dewey, who's become my favorite character. And there's these little subtle things they talk. This is okay. So Sydney's come. So basically, the first thing is Tatum says this. They were saying this is the worst killing since, and she stops herself, and you don't know why. And then they go into the school, and then in the interrogation scene, a scene or 2 later, they say, "Oh, this is Sydney's coming in. Sydney Prescott. She was daughter of," and they kind of, again, they stop themselves because it's hard for them to sort of talk about these things in front of her for good reason, and you don't know what. And then basically, you know, when Sydney goes home after school, we get that news broadcast, and then it's finally revealed Sydney's mom. Sydney's mom was murdered, and at Sydney. There's like a picture of her and her mother, and it's like this cool little subtle reveal, and then there's this visual reveal, and it's economic storytelling, and it's a great example of Craven using the visual language of film, and also these little subtle moments to tell a particular story without beating your head over, beating you over the head with it, which are the other movies do. Because other movies would just say, oh, you know, your mom, it was so terrible what happened to her. They would just do that immediately, but they sort of build that throughout these several sequences in the first act. I don't know if you guys picked up on that or.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again going to script. It's such an elegant script in that way, and it's unfortunate because like I think that's something that gets taken for granted in Scream. Like the original has something that the later movies do not. Part of the big mystery is why Sydney, you know, like why is this happening, and the way that they express that. And like you said, like you don't know that her mom is murdered, then you don't know about her, you know, adulterous behavior, and then there's Cotton Weary, and this stuff gets like little by little by little, you start to see why this is circling around Sydney. You know, you start to get it, and it's like again, it's a really elegant delivery, like because at their core, the Scream movies are not slasher movies. I mean, you can say, but they're mysteries. You know, they're almost like giallo in a sense. Like they're not supernatural. There is no monster, there's no returning single you know killer. It's a mystery. And the Scream 1 had a mystery that no other Scream did, is why Sydney. Now we know why Sydney. It's all you know, we know thoroughly why Sydney at this point, but we didn't have that in Scream 1, and that was a really cool part of it that was really put out there really well. And then by the time you kind of put those things together, the meta of like, you know, of Billy and Matthew Lillard's Stu he's one of the best performances. Oh man, I love Stu. When you put like their personal stakes in there, and Sydney's history and her mom recent history, like it all comes together in just an absolute perfect way. And like you said, Farrell, the way that they dole out that mystery visually, and what they, just importantly, what they don't say is what they do say, is really great. And it's such an important part of the mystery, of the execution, of the surprises. And it's just done, just again, it's another thing that's done so well in this movie.
Yeah, I think that's why the scene around when they're all sitting around the fountain talking about being interrogated is so effective, because everybody's there, both killers are there, and you have Tatum and you have Sydney and then you have Randy, and they're kind of going through the whys of everything. And you know, well, why Casey, why this person, who's next, and so many things that Stu and Billy say in that moment seem like throwaway lines because they're just having a conversation, when really they're just trying to subvert the fact that like it wasn't us, like they're, you know, they're trying to direct the blame elsewhere. Almost, I think a little bit, maybe, I don't know if they're like purposefully projecting on Randy, but you know, it gets projected on Randy at one point too throughout the film. But that conversation that they all have as a group of friends is so real, but it's also, it's very important. And like when you watch it a second time, your gaze on this film is completely different, because now you know that how it turns out. So now you're watching Stu, you're watching Bill, and you're watching their actions to see, oh, was that moment, was that sparking this to go after this person? So yeah,
During that lunch scene, there's a subtle implication about who may have committed that first murder, because there's a moment where Stu says, I didn't kill anybody, and then Billy says, nobody said you did. Now that could either mean that Billy is the one who did it, and you know, he doesn't want the perception in his weird, crazy mind to be that Stu is the one who did it, or it could be, yeah, nobody said you did, shut up. You know what I mean? So it's interesting, because like, you know, if there's just that subtle kind of like revealing without revealing, that again is almost in every sequence. Is I think that's great. I wanted to talk about that first attack scene with Sydney at home. You know, she's on the phone with Tatum. They're going to rent a video and all this stuff, and then she gets the call from the killer, and it's that has one of my favorite moments in it, where they talk about horror movies. She's like, yeah, I don't really watch that shit. You know, it's just some dumb girl, you know, running up the stairs when she'd be going out the front door. And then moments later, when she's running from the killer, she runs up the stairs instead of going out the front door. So it's not that she's dumb, it's that she's in a movie, and she's in a horror movie. So it's like she understands, she kind of gets what horror movies are. And I love Scream because there's so many movies that pretend real life doesn't exist or pretend movies don't exist. It's that they exist in this weird netherworld where they're kind of playing by their own rules. But what Scream does, it says, no, we're aware of exactly what you're watching because we watch it too. But that doesn't mean we would survive. You know what I mean? Because everybody says, oh, I would just I would kick him in the, whatever. I would punch him. Or really, would you? I mean, if you're being chased by a killer, or do you have the foresight to do what you would said you would do in the comfort of your own home, sitting on a nice comfortable couch, saying, run out the front door instead of going up the stairs? No, you would probably go up the stairs instead of going out the front door because your mind is so scrambled. You're just trying to survive. So it's great. I love that scene. Yeah, I just wanted to get you guys' thoughts on that first that opening, or that first attack scene with Sydney.
I always wonder when I watch that scene if they intend to kill her in that moment or if they tend to just kind of fuck with her, because it's never really clear, but it clearly rattles her, and then it doesn't, obviously she doesn't die, but yeah, it always, going into that scene, makes me wonder the intent behind whoever's in that mask at that moment. Is it like they're trying to offer, or are they just trying to rattle her to keep the game going for them because it's fun for them?
That's an interesting point. I never thought of that.
Yeah, I think about that too. I always wonder, but then I think it's to rattle her, because like they have, like, he drops the phone and seems like intentionally, and then his phone is cleared, so it's like a way to get him off the board to play. But I don't know, because it's so like, I mean, it could have easily. It's weird because it's like, why didn't you just kill her then? You had a really good chance, like
yeah.
It's a very risky thing that they did there from their point of view. But yeah, it's a great scene. It's a great sequence. It's such a, like you said, it plays again with the tropes, and Sydney's conversation is so cool. Like, not only self-aware, but like, Jolene, going back to your point of them being that conversation at the school where they're just having this back and forth conversation, and it reveals so much character of everybody. Everybody's there, everybody has interesting things to say and showing like who they are. And it's something that like also like I lament like in later versions, because like the more convoluted Scream has become, the less time that they actually have time to just be characters, because they're talking about the convolutions, and they're talking about the convolutions. Right. And it's like this, like, it's like the scene in The Last Jedi where Rey looks in the mirror and the mirror just goes on and on and on and on forever. Like, it's like, I feel like that's what Screams become now. It's like they have to talk about forever. And you don't really, they try to do it in Scream 5. They have the one scene where the guy's like, I got bruises from football, man. It's like, I guess that's a red herring. I don't know. But jumping ahead, but like, it's such a great character scene. Like, they let the characters talk. And when Sydney's talking on the phone, she's like, no, I'm too smart for that. Like, I'm too intelligent. I know this stuff. I'm aware, and I'm just a smart person. Like, and it just like, yeah, mm-hmm. you really are, and you're an interesting character. And it hears you, because she's saying, like, Farrell, what you said, she's saying the things that like we say. And like, it just brings us closer to Sydney. Like, you're like, this character is smart, and she's cool, and she's tough. And like, I just enjoy being by her side through this whole thing. And just, that's a all character.
Yeah. You actually touched on something that I had a bit of a criticism about with Scream 2. We'll get into that later, but the whole, why doesn't Billy kill Sydney there? It's like, the thing is, they actually have a plan, and their plan involved the dad, the anniversary. So one of the great things about the first movie is there's a logic, but to what they're doing, that some things in Scream 2 just was not there for me. And we can talk about that when we get into Scream 2. But I wanted to talk about, to me, what I feel like is the sort of the heart of the franchise, which is Dewey and Gale and their relationship. Because more than any other characters, I almost feel like it's their movies. I mean, Sydney's the main character, but I feel like, it's Dewey and Gale. If you take them out of the Scream movies, to me, they get knocked down a little bit. And I love how their relationship ebbs and flows with each movie. In the first one, they're introducing each other. They're introduced to each other, and it's a blossoming kind of romance that actually that actually you could see the progression of throughout the film, because they're sort of flirting in the beginning, and and then in the third act they kind of have this thing on this walk, and they're just talking about sort of looking at the stars and things like that, and then they're like jumping in the bushes out of the way of this car, and then they're like bloody, and then he gets stabbed, and then it's like it's and then in the we'll talk about this in the sequels, but later on their relationship, you can see, okay, so now they're estranged, oh okay, so now they're married, oh okay, now they're divorced, and it's even more than Sydney, they go through this crazy evolution, you know what I mean? And I love Dewey, I love that character, I think he's great. I think I can't think I don't know why the actor's name is escaping me right now, but
David Arquette.
yes, I was gonna say David Schwimmer, I don't know why. But oh, that was a joke in Scream 2, I think, that David Schwimmer was going to play a character, but yeah, David Arquette, he's I don't know, he just nails the timings, the inflections, the subtle kind of like, I'm kind of playing a dumb guy, sort of, but not really, you know what I mean? Maybe he's just sort of taking the piss with people. He's smarter than he seems, but he's always getting stabbed. So I don't know. He's great. I love him. I don't know. What do you guys think of the Dewey Gale kind of dynamic?
They're honestly the two of my favorite characters in the whole series. Visually, I love the journey that Gale takes, because she starts out as this small town woman who thinks she's from a big city, so her outfits are like really bold and colorful, and they don't really fit into the world because everybody else is really earth toned and neutral, especially Dewey, because he's in khaki for most of the franchise. And then in the later films she starts to come into herself and her style more, because I think she's realizing the professionalism of her journey and everything. But yeah, they're both fearless, and they're the ones that are actually doing the legwork for for 2 and on. I feel like they're the ones going in, in the third movie, she's the one going into the archives. And, in the second one, her and Dewey are the one going into the school and researching the videotapes. And I feel like, while Sydney is our protagonist, they're the ones that do the mystery legwork of figuring out who it is constantly. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. They're the heart and soul, there's no doubt, and, they do both Arquette and Courtney Cox do such a great job with those characters. They're just so memorable. And that's the great thing. Scream franchise has so many great characters, and I think they're part of the best. But then they're the people doing the most work, because unfortunately, again, a byproduct of the sequels is the more convoluted they become, and the more like they have to be like it all has a tie back to Sydney. You kind of have to push Sydney out of the way so she's not really doing anything. And like Scream 2, it's like, well, she can't be around Loomis's mom, so we just got to like kind of get her, like keep them apart, and so on and so forth. She takes like, and by 3, Sydney's just kind of there. Like they kind of reactivate her in 4, but like she's doing less and less. So to make up, kind of fill the gap, Dewey and Gale just keep rising and rising, and more to do. And they're such good characters and so capable and so well done that, like, from a filmmaking, from the story or filmmaking perspective, thank God they're there, because like, you have to have someone playing those roles, being the, having agency and being active. And like, they are always those ones, like you said, Jolene, doing it because, like I said, increasingly Sydney just could not, because it just wouldn't make sense. So it's a good thing they had them.
Yeah. I also want to talk about Stu, because Matthew Lillard, it just blows me away every time I see this movie. He's so good. He's playful. To me, Matthew Lillard captured the tone of these movies more than anybody else, even though I love Dewey and Gale. Matthew Lillard knew exactly what kind of movie he was making, and he played that up. Because one of the great things about the Scream franchise, and one thing that I think was missing, particularly in Part 5, was there's a playfulness to it. And Matthew Lillard, he's a representative of that playfulness. This kind of he's unhinged. He's a little bit nuts, but he's having fun. And he I don't know, he's just great. I love him. I love him in the video store sequence, which I want to talk a little bit about with Randy and Billy. Because there's some interesting foreshadowing going on there. But Stu, and I love, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but just the fact that you know, the two killer aspect is interesting because like you have Stu, who's this kind of unhinged, you know, everything is chaos, silly clown, and then you have Billy, who's sort of this guy with an actual motivation, and he's kind of the leader of the group, and they play off of each other really well. And I think that's something that the other films were kind of missing with the two killer aspect, which was it felt a little bit more random with those films. In the first movie, it felt like two sides of the same coin, like you couldn't really have one without the other, and they come together in such a great way. And that video store sequence is there's some foreshadowing there, because they're, you know, Billy comes in and, you know, he kind of grabs Randy by the shirt collar and he says, you know, how do we know you're not the killer? And then Stu comes up behind him and he kind of puts his arms around him, and then they're trapping Randy, and visually this is a perfect representation of what these guys are. They're the killers, and Randy is being trapped by these two crazy forces. Again, it's telling you without telling you, because when you're watching the movie, and when I was watching the movie, I was just kind of like, oh, okay, you know, they're just giving him shit. But then later on, it's like, oh, okay. And I rewatched it, you know, when it came out on video way back in the day, and I picked up on these subtle visual foreshadowing moments, and you know, I love that. I don't know, what do you guys think?
Oh yeah, I mean, I was gonna say the exact same thing. Like the video stores again, it's like they're just like, these are the killers. Like they're just showing you, and it's so great. And but like, man, I love Stu. I just wear the Matthew Lillards of the world anymore. Like I feel like you can go back through history, and there's always like, and nobody's obviously coming to mind because, you know, my brain's, you know, stupid, right? Just betraying me right now. But there's always those unhinged, wacky character actors, and there's so, and I don't feel like we have that anymore. I don't feel like we have the Matthew Lillards, and it's such an underserved thing right now, and you know, unappreciated, because he is so great in that movie. And like just the end, I mean, it's so funny. He's like, my mom and dad are gonna be so mad at me. Like it's so, because he just thought, he's like, oh, I'm gonna get away with this. And you know, that guy like in high school who's just like, just kind of, who would follow the alpha because he's not quite an alpha himself, but he maybe secretly dreams of being, or at least wants to be alpha adjacent. So he's just going to do it, you know. And Matthew Lillard's character Stu is just crazy enough, and you see the crazy in him. And that's, again, I think, Farrell, you're right. I mean, like there's been no better combo of like, it makes sense. They have motivation, a personal motivation, and it just works. And they both sell it. Like they both sell the Skeet Ulrich sells the angry crazy really well, and I think that's something that's also been kind of lagged. Like Timothy Olyphant did his best, but like Skeet Ulrich nailed that angry crazy, and then Matthew Lillard nailed the gonzo crazy. And like it's just, when you see, like you said, you pair up the ghost's face throughout history, like I don't think anyone's nailed it as good as those two nailed it in the first go.
Yeah, I was going to mention James Cagney as like, you know, an example of a, you know, silver screen kind of actor who had that X factor that I think is missing from a lot of people. I would say Matthew Lillard was, I don't think, yeah, I almost wish that Lillard became a bigger star, because I think Scream was a star-making turn for him. And I think people kind of they underestimated how good he was, because, oh, it's just a silly slasher movie. But no, that actually takes a lot of skill to be able to pull that off and juggle all that, sort of, to make random chaos look controlled, which he does. He's not just some goofy, dumb actor doing goofy, dumb stuff. He's playing a very specific character. You know what I mean? Because you can't have Billy without Stu, and he knows that, and Craven knows that, and Williamson knows that. So, you know, I feel like all three of them were working towards building that character and having it be. And you know, if you watch interviews with Matthew Lillard, he's a very astute guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
he knows his shit,
and great physicality too. Like his body. I mean, granted, he's a big, lanky guy, but like he expresses it so well. He has, sorry to joke, but like he has awesome physicality too that you just don't really see. Like he uses his body so well.
Yeah, there's that great moment. We're skipping ahead a little bit, but that's okay. When they're stabbing each other, he pumps himself up with this crazy kind of like, and I was watching the movie the first time, and I was like, just blown. I was like, this is astounding. This is just like, these are the kind of movie moments that you just don't see a lot of anymore, where it's like they are taking something that is very crazy and almost making it a spectacle. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and that's what the character is doing. He's like, oh, I'm putting a show on for Sydney because I'm having fun with this, because to me, this is just a movie. That's how far gone his brain dead Gen Xer personality is. Is that he sees everything as it's a movie. So I'm going to theatricalize this. I don't know if that's a word, but make this theatrical in as much of a way as possible. And I don't know, I love that moment. But Jolene, were you gonna say something? I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to agree with both of you. I also want to touch back to what you said, Farrell, about how he's controlled and unhinged. And I love that juxtaposition with him, because even just through the body of Matthew Lillard's work, you can consistently see that controlled, unhinged. Like I think of like She's All That, where he's like this reality star and he's so unhinged, but he's in control as an actor. And it takes a lot of moxie to be able to do that as an actor. And because I think a lot of actors just play it crazy, realizing that crazy is not really an emotion. There's like a drive behind that emotion. And he is one of the people that can actually do that and do that well and have there be intent and objective behind it. So yeah, I love Matthew Lillard. He's great.
Yeah. So now we're at the end. And the interesting about this party scene is it actually comes kind of midway through the movie. It's technically the third act. The third act happens at that party, but the party actually starts midway, which is interesting because the first half of the movie is all character and all build up, which is great. And I love that. It's all build up. It's all backstory. It's all sort of doing the Agatha Christie thing about who could have done this and all this stuff. And there's some murders in there. And actually in the original script, the Principal Himbry death wasn't there. I think Dimension Films were kind of like, hey, it's been a while. We need to kill somebody else. So he put Principal Himbry's death in there, which actually kind of helped out in the plot a little bit, because that gave motivation for the kids to leave the party to have all the remaining characters there for the final act, because they say, oh, Principal Himbry's been hung from the goalpost in the football field or whatever, and they all leave to go see it, which is another comment on the theme of this movie, which is this sort of like these desensitized people who don't, they to them everything is a movie. You know what I mean? It's spectacle. So anyway, this party scene, it comes kind of halfway through, and it's bodies start piling up. It's great because it's almost like the typical third act of a slasher, but it's not, because the very first thing I want to talk about is when Gail goes to her cameraman and says, give me this little video surveillance camera, and she sticks it in the living room, and so that they can actually observe what may potentially turn out to be a bloodbath, which if you think about it, is kind of sick, but that's where they're at. That's another theme of the movie. So, and I love how that sort of mirrors another theme, which is them having these meta takes on horror and being sort of a self-reflexive thing that they're doing with the movie, which is where they're commenting on horror movies while making a horror movie. And it's like, okay, so these characters who are going to watch this potential bloodbath are, they're in a horror movie and they're going to potentially watch a horror movie through this video camera. So it's another great play on these ideas. And I love that. I think it's great. And I don't know if you guys are, sort of up on that, but I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I really enjoy the way that the third act is crafted, because we know who these people are now. So when things start to go awry, we find ourselves yelling at the screen, like, no, don't do that. No, don't go there. Don't have that one drink or go upstairs or anything, because all of these rules have been established. Even though they've tried to subvert those rules, we still know the rules of the grand scheme of what a horror movie is. And and when Randy calls it out at different moments through the Halloween movies, while it's on screen and the kids are watching it, I think that's just a really nice moment too. And then having Matthew Lillard make fun of those moments, and he's like, oh, I'll be right back, when he leaves the room and everything. And yeah, and it just, the scale of the house too makes it almost like Clue, because there's so many rooms, and so all of these things are happening in little pockets, and you don't realize what's happening in other rooms, and that there is chaos. Like when Tatum gets stuck in the garage door, nobody realizes that she's out there. And when Sydney and Bill are upstairs, nobody realizes that they're upstairs. So there's like these small moments happening in these little worlds. Sorry, my dog. that these small worlds are creating their own like mini movies within the larger scheme of the movie. So
Is your dog a Scream fan? Because it sounds like it wants to talk about it.
she's not a fan of the doorbell and people walking in the
Oh.
hallway.
Yeah, no, it's great that you finally, I was about to get into that, the whole Randy talking about rules of order, because that's kind of it's a key scene in the film where he's, you know, gathered, or he's got this audience. And I think I love that because he's this video store clerk who's obviously kind of a nerd, and he's got a crush on Sydney, and he's probably looking to be the cool kid. And in this moment, he can be cool because he can talk about these things that these people don't know about. He says, "You don't know about the rules? Let me just explain it." And then he goes into all the rules. And when I'm watching this movie for the first time, I'm like, yeah, I do. I remember. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, this is. And they were all things that I was sort of, I knew on a subconscious level, but just had never acknowledged. And he acknowledged it. And the great thing about it is, it's a culmination of the slasher genre at that point, because, you know, Craven and Williamson were kind of, even Craven with New Nightmare, he was like, you know, with his Nightmare franchise, he was kind of like, well, I don't really know what to do with this anymore. And the only thing I can do now is do a meta take on it. And I have this theory that when people run out of ideas, they start deconstructing old ideas. So with New Nightmare, Craven was deconstructing his own franchise. And I feel like with Scream, they gave him a chance to deconstruct the horror franchise and slashers in particular. And Randy is a mouthpiece for that. And, you know, I wanted to talk a bit about, this is something, I don't know, this might be a little bit too abstract, but the rules, okay? It's like, and you see them for the first time, they all kind of come together in Halloween. The John Carpenter classic, you know, about smoking and drinking and sex and drugs and these things you're not supposed to do. And almost like this puritanical kind of sanitization of these ideals where it's like, okay, you're in a suburban environment where it's supposed to be safe, and you got this killer running around, which almost kind of represents almost represents like this sort of, I don't know, like puritanical force that it's going to cleanse, you know, all these apparently terrible things that these teenagers are doing, you know, drinking and sex and drugs. And it's like, I've always wondered, you know, where a lot of that stuff comes from. And, you know, we don't totally have to get into that, but I really want to focus on Scream, but I don't know, it's playing with that stuff. I don't know if you guys have any comments on that scene with Randy.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's something I think about a lot lately, and I've had conversations in context of Scream 5, which, you know, we'll get into about this. But something I think that gets confused with meta is not just self-awareness, you know, like meta is not just like a gossamer layer, which Scream 5 is, of like, hey, requels, am I right? That's not meta. Like, that's just like, you're doing it wrong. Like, I'm sorry to say, like, and we'll talk more about it, it's more in depth than that, but like meta is like an examination of yourself from the inside out and then turning it on its own head, you know, which is New Nightmare, which is a conversation I have, right? Matrix Resurrection is super meta. It's like just examining from within the thing that it's like looking at yourself without a mirror. It's like the most confusing thing to kind of like explain, but we all get it, you know, we know it. And Scream does that. The original Scream does it so well, because like it's Wes just going inside the horror genre and then just blowing it out, and like we've been talking about, putting these pieces together in just a new and interesting way, because the slasher genre never had the mystery. It never had the self-awareness of like talking about it angle. Like there's so many things that he's doing that are absolutely classic, of a classic mystery, of a classic iconic looking slasher with a mask, but he's doing it in a way that, like, again, that he did with New Nightmare, similar but different, that just blows it up in this extremely interesting, extremely fascinating and fun way that like is so effective, you know. And you can only do that so many times. I think that's the problem, like where people differ on where the Scream franchise goes, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. You can't do that every time, you know, like it's just impossible, you know. But like he did it in one, he did it so well in one, and in two too. But like it brings you to this point in the end, and why the conclusion is so perfect, because the conclusion feels inevitable. It feels inevitable, like we've said, of all of the plot, all the story, and all the character stuff that were perfectly laid out through acts 1 and 2. And you're right, Feral, act 3 is weird because it's so long. It's like 50 minutes long, which is unusual, but it's because It doesn't feel that way ever, but like everything, so much gets tied up, and it's like miraculous how well, not just like the story and the character stuff, but the ideas, like the ideas that it starts to posit in the beginning from the very start about turning things on their head. The ideas come fully culminated and fully realized in the last act with everything that Stu and Billy say, and everywhere how it concludes. Everything just ties up to a perfect bundle, perfect package. That's just, it's incredible. It's incredible. Like like I said, the story, idea, the character, all of it is so rich and so smart, and it works so incredibly well.
Yeah, I totally agree. Let's talk about the ending here as we start to wrap out Scream 1. And we kind of touched on this a little bit with the two killer aspect, but I wanted to go into that a little bit more because I think one thing some of the other movies missed that Scream got right was, again, we talked about the yin and yang. And I think a lot of the other Scream movies, it's more either yin or yang. They're in the killers, they act more similar than different in the other Scream movies, as opposed to this one where Billy and Stu are very, very different people. And when they're trapping Sydney, you can see that playfulness, that sort of bouncing back and forth, and you can see a relationship that is being implied without us having sort of seen it play out totally, because we don't, we've only met these characters a couple days ago. So this sequence where they're in the third act at the ending with Sydney, you can see so many things play out, little character beats that imply a relationship. I love how, when they're stabbing each other, Billy's like, give me the knife, and Stu's kind of like, no, and he's yelling at him like, now, give me the knife, and you could see that domineering personality, almost like an adult barking at a child, and that's the relationship that they have. It's like almost like a kid and an adult. The adult is the responsible one, and he's the one who's going to plan everything out. The kid brings the energy, and that's how that sequence plays out. And I love these little acting beats by Matthew Lillard in this scene where, and a lot of it is improvised, where Sydney's gotten away and they're looking for her, and then they get the call. He picks it up. Matthew Lillard actually crosses his legs as he's talking to Sydney, and it's a little subtle character beat wasn't in the script, totally improvised, and that's all Matthew Lillard. That's all great acting. And he's kind of like, my parents are gonna be so mad at me. And then Billy throws the phone at him. And that's another improv where he says, you fucking hit me with the phone, dick. That's not in the script. That's totally improv. And that's all Matthew Lillard. And I kind of want to get you guys' thoughts on the ending and what you think and all that, because there's some really, really meaty stuff in there.
Yeah, you can see within their character dynamic how I guess Stu takes it seriously to a point. Billy's really the one intent on revenge, and he's the driving force in all of this. And Matthew Lillard is just here for a good time, but he's the way that he's joking, the way that he's like falling on the phone because he's losing all the blood, and he's trying to make his way through the kitchen, and he's slowly getting more weak, and like and he's just like, come on, man. And then but this is before he does Scooby-Doo, but his Shaggy starts to come out in his voice because he's getting all raspy, and he's just, I feel like they're both like children on a playground, and Billy took it too far, and Stu's like, but we're trying to play, right? Like he's still intent on, no, this is for fun, right? And you could see his like the twinkle kind of leave him in that way, not because he's dying, but because he's like, oh, I really thought we were having fun. And then it stopped being fun because Billy confronted Sydney and was like, no, this is revenge now. And you just see him see red, and it's like a switch immediately. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
Yeah, I mean, like Stu is like the classic, like I think like now we're seeing like with like social media, like, oh no, consequences for my actions, where it finally dawned on him when at the moment, like when he realized he's not going to get away with this, and he's like, oh no, what have I done? Because then I think in his mind, all he was thinking like, yeah, this is gonna be great, and then it becomes not great. And it's such a perfect, like Jolene said, it's so perfect. You see like switches in both him and Billy, like the way that they both like turn into different things in this moment, and it totally makes sense, utterly earned. Yeah, I mean, the ending is just, I think that's a great, a word I can use that is so great. It's just earned. There's no convolution to it. There's no like, reveal that you're like, really? Like there's none of that. Like it's utterly, everything feels inevitable, still surprising and still effective and still great, but there's nothing in it. Even like when Billy comes back after he'd been stabbed, you're like, yeah, I get it. Like there's nothing that feels, that doesn't feel appropriate to everything that's come before. It all is just a seamless whole, and it's not easy to do. It's not easy. Endings are hard, and this one is one of the best endings that you can really ask for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the piece as a whole always feels to me like a Greek play in a way, because you have the chorus throughout the whole time telling you what's happening, and even though it's not registering in your own brain if it's the first time you're watching it, and then each of their death is like a device of their own hubris, where Billy is literally killed by the television, like something that he was
Right.
looking to and like trying to pretend like he was a part of, what actually kills him. And yeah, I just think it's so well done. And they do it kind of the same in Scream 2, because then there's the literal Grecian play in it. But yeah, these are very Grecian to me, the first two Screams.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the TV, because I did a breakdown in one of my cinemechanic videos on Scream, which will actually be on this channel shortly, about the way that they're killed. And Matthew Lillard's character is killed with the television, like on his face, and it's interesting because that's kind of the mechanism by which the brain dead zombie gets its information and doesn't realize that that information is part of a world that doesn't totally exist. So when they get to reality, it's like they're ill-equipped to deal with it. So he's killed by a television, and then Billy's actually killed by a gun, which is more in line with sort of his egoic desires and his violent, kind of like crazy, unhinged, over the top psychopath. You know what I mean? So it's even the way the killers are killed goes into the thematics, which you just don't see in a lot of horror movies. I mean, it's just a random kind of thing. So yeah, I want to skip it. Go ahead and get to Scream 2. I think all of our thoughts about Scream 1 are in alignment. It's a great movie. It's a great slash film. It's a great mystery. It's to me, hasn't really been topped. It's still the highest grossing, or it's still the most profitable of the Scream movies. And I still think I still believe it's, if you account for inflation, I still think it's the highest grossing horror slasher movie. Yeah, because inflation is definitely a thing with box office. But yeah, no, we all love Scream 1. Scream 2 is great. I mean, I'm trying to think of I'm trying to remember how I saw Scream 2. I can't totally think of that. It was probably on video. But Scream 2 came out about a year after the first one, which was really quick, because they're obviously trying to capitalize on that franchise. And I remember reading a draft of Scream 2 before the movie came out, because I was a movie geek, and I would go online and I would look for scripts and things, and apparently the script for Scream 2 leaked. And this was actually a big problem, because they had to change the ending. And I don't remember, I remember reading an ending that was different from the movie. I just can't recall what it was exactly. I just do remember reading an ending and thinking, oh, that's kind of, that's okay. And then I saw the movie, and then it was like, it was different, but I was kind of like, it's maybe a little bit of an improvement. But yeah, Scream 2 opens, interestingly enough, with the premiere of Stab, this movie franchise within a movie. Basically, the Scream movie has, in meta fashion, birthed its own franchise within the movie universe. And two Black characters are going to see the film, Jada Pinkett and Omar Epps. And this sequence, I've always found this sequence kind of funny, even though it's commenting on this terrible trope where Black characters are the first ones to die in a lot of horror movies. But the great thing about Scream, the great thing about the sequence, is that it's aware of this issue, but it's being playful with it. So it's killing the Black characters first, but it's doing it in such a way that is actually commenting on that, as opposed to just doing it gratuitously. So I always kind of forgave it for that, because I'm like, oh, okay, I get what they're doing. And I think it's great, because they go to the movie, she's scared, he's kind of like, being a little bit playful about it, which is in line with the Scream playfulness that I think is great. And he gets killed, and then there's all these ghost faces, and she gets killed in the theater surrounded by these people, which I always thought was a horrible moment, because I mean, it's like no one even realizes what's happening until she goes on stage, and she's screaming and she's bloody, and everybody kind of stops. It's like as she's being stabbed, people are so distracted by the movie, they're not even paying it. They don't even realize it. So that's another comment on like the desensitization to violence that we have as a society. And Scream continues to comment on this. And she dies, and it's a great sequence. I think it's a great sequence. I think the Drew Barrymore sequence in the first one's better, but I think if you're going to do a sequel, what else do you do with something like this? I thought it was really clever.
Yeah, my only critiques with this sequence are, and it's like a stupid one, is how strong is his hunting knife that he was able to stab through the stall of a bathroom wall, because those are pretty thick. But that was my only comment. But no, I like the opening, and I like that now that we're into the second one, there's some notoriety behind it. So you see more names coming up in this movie. Like you have Heather Graham, and you have Jada Pinkett, and you have Sarah Michelle Gellar at the height of Buffy. Like you have these women involved in this movie now that, not that David Arquette and Courtney Cox weren't a huge name at the time, and Neve Campbell, but you're seeing more names being like, oh, I kind of want a piece of that now, which is really, really interesting for a horror movie, because usually horror, especially in the 90s, it's kind of shoved to the side a lot. So
yeah, I mean I like the intro, and it's kind of funny because later on in the movie, like one of the rules of a sequel, as Randy tells us, you have to go bigger. So like you have, you go from Drew Barrymore alone in a very isolated place, besides your boyfriend, who literally has no dialogue because he has tape over his mouth, but you have a theater full of people, and you're introducing this layer of the stab films, which is become an interesting part of the Scream narrative. But yeah, it works. I kind of like the smaller, the Drew Barrymore is obviously, you can't top that. But like if you're like, hey, let's do something different, let's do this. The cold open is going to be the hallmark of the franchise, and let's do something different. It certainly was that, and it was also more brutal. This is something also Randy's like, you got to be more gore, you got to be more violence, and it's certainly that, and it works, and it's great performances, like probably just as good as Drew Barrymore, if not just a little less, I guess, but still awesome, from J. Pinkett Smith and Omar Epps, who's always awesome. And introduced that Greek thing, the theatricalness of it, which, like Jolene, like you said, is a thing through 2 as well.
Yeah, it's I think outside of the premiere, maybe I don't know if I'm misremembering this, but I thought there was a giant hand with a knife coming down like this.
There is. It's like it's like the Back to the Future 3D Jaws or something.
Right. That premiere, it's so over the top, and it gets into that theatricality.
And they were handing out costumes in the theater. Like when people were entering the theater, they were like handing out costumes and everything.
Yeah, and no movie studio would allow this.
No, who's got the budget for that?
And that actually kind of goes into the point I want to get into, because we introduced Sydney at college. She's older, a little bit older. She's at college and stuff, and she's got a new roommate, and they see the death of the 2 opening characters in this news report. And this news report brings up something that the first film kind of, I don't want to say it glossed over. It really did kind of go into it, but just not as heavily as in the sequel. Is this idea of violence in cinema that was so big in the 90s. In the 90s, you had this real push to clamp down on movie violence, even video game violence. And the Scream sequel is commenting on that, and I thought that was great. It's kind of going into this whole sort of desensitized culture and the bloodlust that characters have, and it was really nice to see Sydney kind of a little bit older. And when I saw the movie, I was like, oh, okay. It's because when you see a lot of slasher sequels, when you do the next one, it's almost like they don't, I don't know. This is just something that Craven is good at. There was just a way he introduced her that made it seem like refreshing to see her again. You know what I mean? Oh, she's alive. Oh, great. It's really good. But they watch that newscast sequence, and then there's this violence in the violence in cinema thing going on, which is going to be a hallmark of the Scream sequels going forward. But again, the movies don't hold back. It says, yeah, this is what the 90s are saying, but it's a horror movie. This is what horror movies do. And we're going to comment on that. And we're not going to just ignore it, but we're also not going to let it sort of, impinge on what we want to do as a film.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite introductions of Sydney, because this is the Sydney that we know going forward now, because now she's introduced to us going back to that pajama theory of she's in lounge pants and she's in like a racerback tank top. So she's ready to fight. She's already had all this stuff happen to her. So now she's almost prepared now. I don't know if you've read the book, The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix, but it's a meta book about final girls, and one of the traits of the main characters is that they're always on, because now these women have a heightened sensitivity to like things going on around them and the trauma happening around them. And we see that with Sydney kind of, I felt like, in a more realistic way than how new Laurie Strode was introduced to us as like a doomsday prepper, but she's very much like, she's more she's in control of herself and aware that, if I need to get up and go, I have that ability now.
Good point.
Yeah, and it's weird. Everything we're talking about here, from one into those great details that Jolene points out, and how we're introduced to Sydney and Farrell, everything that you said about like 90s and violence, that was a huge conversation that was going on. Like, these are really, really intelligent movies. And it's hard to say like, 3, 4, 5 aren't, and it's not like such a bad criticism, but they're just not as intelligent. But it's only because like 1 and 2 kind of said it. You had the still like the commentary about culture and about the world and about horror movies and about horror sequels, but you can't go back to that well time and time again. Like, once you talked about the horror sequel, like, you can't be 3 like, we're going to talk about the horror sequel again. It's like 2 already did it, so 4, you can't go back to the well, so, but like, not to put make this all criticism of 3 through 5, but like, it's such a cool, interesting thing to look at why we like 1 and 2 so much. It's not just because they were just fresh and interesting and new, they were, but they were also super smart. They were also really, really smart movies that really drained the well that like of what you can really do with them, and maximized each 1 and 2, maximized everything that they could be, and everything for the genre, for the time they were made, and just a fundamentally really, really strong movie, even without those things. But those things are what makes them, classic and some of the best of all time. But they're remarkably intelligent movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you, going back to what you were saying earlier, Michael, is that with the sequels, they do, after 2, kind of get a little exhausting, because it's hard to keep talking about the same type of content of, we know what we are. And I think maybe 4 and 5, they work in some elements that we can get into, but you really have to let culture breathe, and you have to give it a break in order for it to develop, in order to comment on it. So that's why I really hope 6 doesn't come out right away. It really needs time we need to let culture develop so that we can talk about it.
That's a great point. It's such a perfect way of putting it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good luck with that, because the studio is probably just going to pump them out once every 2 years now. Because I think Paramount bought the rights or something, and now Paramount is just, it's a big studio. They're going to want to get that cash every couple of years. But no, that's a really great point, and why Scream 4, I think, took so long to get made, because there's like there's a big gap between 3 and 4. And I miss that. I miss it about Star Wars. I miss it about a lot of franchises where you get, distance makes the heart grow fonder, or whatever it is, But anyway, there's a great thing in Scream 2 where they have a film class, and Randy's there, and we introduce and Randy gets introduced in the best way possible. It's like, oh, of course, it's a film class, and he's in there, and they're talking about sequels, and it's great. And Sarah Michelle Gellar's there, and I love the fact that she's in film class. She's an intelligent film person. She knows her shit, and it was great to see her. And I wasn't a Buffy the Vampire Slayer watcher or anything. I think I had seen some of it, but I was more aware of her from I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is one of my favorite horror movies. Yeah, they're in this film class, and they're talking about sequels, and it's another thing that Scream 2 got right, that I think, as much as I do really like Scream 3, haters be damned, I think Scream 2 got it better with the sequel thing. And I was also a little pissed off, because I don't know if this was intentional, but they got some things incorrect in that scene, because he's like, they're talking about aliens, and one character's like, yeah, get away from me, you bitch. And then Randy's like, I believe it's stay away from you, you bitch. No, it's actually get away from her, you bitch, unless I'm wrong. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen Aliens, but I thought that was like, that was just like, I don't know, weird error, or maybe they just did it on purpose. But anyway, the point is that sequence, they talk about sequels, and, Scream 2, it's a sequel, and yeah, it's great. And I think one of the things that the Scream movies, if the trap that they've fallen into, is using these meta takes as an excuse to just keep doing the same thing. It's like, oh, it's okay, we're talking about it, we're making fun of it. Like, no, it's actually, you actually kind of have to do better than what you're talking about, because again, audiences get tired of it. There's fatigue involved, and I was certainly fatigued. But I do like that aspect of Scream 2. That film class, I thought it was a great setup.
Yeah, I always found it interesting that they've made Sydney an acting major too. Like, she's a theater major.
Right.
And that always kind of, when I was younger, I think it always kind of confused me, because I was like, well, why would she want to be in the spotlight? But I think the more that I look at these films as a whole now, she was probably just wanting to play different parts, because her life, the poor thing, was just so violent. So like, she's in, trying to play these different roles. But yeah, I always found it very interesting that they used theater and film as like these storytelling devices in this world.
Yeah, 2 is, and we'll talk about 2 is when it was good. 3 was like, when they did this, try to do the same thing but with movies, it was like, oh boy. but like it's still like they did enough, like you said, the fatigue, fairly, it's a perfect word. They did enough of like twists, and it was clever, and brought back the character. They did enough in 2 and sequelized it, making it bigger and gorier. And there's some really surprising, I'm sure we'll talk about, there's some really surprising stuff that makes it feel like the stakes are genuine. And it really works. It really works. Like the conversation, like you said, the topical meta conversation is smart and works. They make a good plot. We love the characters. They introduce really cool new characters. So they do a good job with it. I think that's like, if you're going to do that, again, like if you're going to do that sequel and you're going to try to do the same thing of like what Scream did with the commentary and everything that was so rich, like, I don't know that you can do it better than Scream 2. I think we all prefer Scream 1 because it's just absolutely perfect. It's the original, but like, I don't know. I don't know what Scream 2 can get much better. Like, it's just a really solid, still intelligent script, a lot of great things in it. It's a solid movie, a solid sequel.
Yeah. And then, we get into Debbie Salt, the new character that's introduced, and she
totally not a fake name. Debbie
right. No, exactly. I thought that was so funny. Even when I was younger, I just knew, oh, there's something up there. But I love how her introduction is kind of a reversal of the first movie, where Gail is trying to go after Sydney for a story, and in this one, Debbie Salt is trying to go after Gail for a story, and Gail's having to defend herself. And again, it goes into, like I said before, Dewey and Gail having the most development over the course of these movies. And this is, a movie where Gail actually has an arc, a bit of an arc. And Debbie Salt is part of that, because I think I think Gail sees what she could become in Debbie Salt, and kind of maybe getting turned off by that. And it's great because, obviously Debbie Salt ends up being Billy's mom, but it's an interesting reversal, and it goes into how, her character evolves over the course of not only this movie, but the other movies. Yeah, I mean, her and Dewey, Dewey's still around. He's flown out because he's worried about Sydney, which I always thought was very sweet. He's got that cute kind of limp going on. That's really interesting. I always like that jacket that he wears. I'm not a costume person, but that outfit that he has on always just kind of stood out to me as this really deliberate thing, because it's so innocent, but it's also so kind of tacky, and you could see Dewey not having fashion sense. You know what I mean?
It's like a dad bomber jacket.
Right, exactly.
And we see Randy kind of becoming a little bit of Dewey in this movie too, where his outfit color palette is kind of mirroring Dewey. He's got the same jackets. She's got the same like texture of his shirts, maybe a little bit brighter because he's younger, but it's almost like Randy wants to be that next Dewey, not in the way that like he's going to enlist and join, you know, the police force, but just in like the whodunit, taking care of Sydney, like, hey, like Dewey, I got this now. It's my turn now. I live with her because I'm here at school. So it's really cute, that especially the scene where they're eating Baskin Robbins, that nice product placement.
Yeah, and we also introduced Cotton Weary, who, you know, we saw brief flashes of in the first movie, because now we're starting to establish the suspects. You know, you got Debbie Salt, you even got Dewey. I mean, he's a suspect, obviously. Gail is. Then you have Mickey, the film student. You have Derek, the boyfriend, the new boyfriend. Yeah, I love Liev Schreiber as an actor. He's great. He's there are actors who are character actors, and there are actors who are good at playing themselves, like the George Clooney's of the world. You know, Liev Schreiber is one of those guys, a really solid, really good actor. He's great because he again, he's smart. He plays enough of that. He could potentially be a psycho, because you could see him pushing Sydney a little bit to get this exclusive Diane Sawyer thing. But then at the same time, you can see that innocence. It's like, hey, I didn't do anything. I'm just, you know, sort of a guy who got caught up in a bad relationship. You could see him acting both of those sides. I don't know. What do you guys think of the new cast in general?
Yeah, I liked him. I mean, that's the thing that like also too did really well. There's like a really good pool of, it could be this person, you know, which again, I think that's something that was lacking in the later ones, where it was, you never really got a great usual suspects, you know, where this, you know, could have been the boyfriend, because, you know, and they, you know, Jolene said it, like that great Baskin Robbins scene. That's so funny. He's like, you know, like where they have that back and forth, but then they eliminate themselves as suspects because they're just like, I don't like that. You know, it's so funny, it's so clever and witty, and but like, yeah, you got, you know, Jerry O'Connell does this thing, you know, like who's, you know, the boyfriend could be him, pre-med, cuts himself perfectly. They do a really nice job of like building a pool of like, it could be this person or that person, and then they surprise it with like who it ends up being, you know, to a degree, but like, you know, it still did a nice job. The characters not quite as rich as the first one, but they still do a nice job of like setting it up so like, you know, it, again, the plausibility, who it could be, who it ends up being, feels organic and makes sense by the end, and that's through having enough red herrings and characters that are working to draw from.
Yeah. I also feel like this is, like Michael was saying earlier, how we kind of push Sydney aside of the other ones. This is like one of the last ones where we see Sydney fully developed, if that makes sense, where she's, because now Cotton Weary has been introduced, so she's like have to self-reflect that, you know, that she wronged him, and you know, so there's that guilt there, and the knowledge of finding out who her mother was and realizing that she didn't really know her mother. And so I feel like this is the last time we see Sydney with that self-reflection and that that complicated layer pattern of being a human, and growing up and realizing that your parents are people too, and they're not just your parents. So
Yeah. Speaking of Sydney, I love how, again, they, you know, make her a theater major, acting major, or whatever it is. And she's doing this play, Cassandra, you know, who, I don't know much about the play, but I kind of know that it was a cursed character, but it was a character that found his bravery within herself and was able to use that. And it's a great, you know, tie-in to Sydney and what she's going through. And I love how they use that set. You know, they're going through the rehearsal, and, you know, the theater director's trying to sort of talk her out of her own mind, and just to get her to relax into the part. And she relaxes, and then she goes and she's going to do it. And then Ghostface may be there. She's seeing images, and it's I love it because it's subtle enough to be like, oh, well, maybe she's just imagining it, but it's also scary because of the way Craven handles set pieces, the lighting, and, you know, all the, you know, these rocks are sort of falling, and these, you know, people are surrounding her, and the camera work is great. And yeah, no, again, this is one of the last movies where she actually has something to do, I think, as a character. And that set piece obviously, you know, ties into the ending and all that stuff. When I saw the movie, a lot of that stuff went over my head. I was, you know, the great thing about the screen films is that they gain more richness when you rewatch them. But on the first watch, I was kind of like, okay, this is, kind of on the nose, my young self, I'm saying, oh, it's on the nose, where it's not really on the nose. It's kind of, it's on the nose, but it's also deep. It's got some deep thematics going on.
Yeah. I mean, it's a smart movie. Again, it's a smart movie. And I think the things that they're doing with Sydney are really interesting. Like you said, the reflection, like it's still having that layer. There's a point where Billy in one says, life is something to the fact life is a movie and we don't get to pick the genre. It's not the best life, but like it's really indicative of what Scream is that like life is a play, like it's about movies, it is a movie, it's about plays, it's about movies, it kind of is always weaving in and out of fiction and reality and fictionalized reality. And it does it really well. Again, that's another thing that two does really well. Like this play, like obviously gives cool moments for, cool visual stuff, for cool dynamics and for, set pieces, but also speaks well to Sydney's character and her growth and where she's been and where she's going. And, like it's really cool to see Sydney have that role because I think we all agree, like that role becomes less and less over time, which is a shame because she's such a great character and she is the central figure of the Scream franchise, but like I think it's just hard to consistently, and the more it goes on, give her things to do. I mean, she's barely even in five. She doesn't really play much of a role. And it's too bad. But Scream. We see a really great Sydney with a lot to do.
Yeah. Let's talk about something that a lot of people. It's kind of a hot button issue. Randy's death, which at the time I was very upset about because I love Randy. But I have mixed feelings about that, Randy's death, because I feel like you did need to kill a legacy character. And I guess if somebody had to go, I love Dewey, I love Gail, I love the relationship, I love Randy. It's like it's almost like kill your darlings, but I love all the darlings. You know what I mean? It's like I was so upset, but it's great. I love that scene. I love him. Again, they're commenting on the '90s, like Manson, Bundy, OJ. These great, clever, humorous jokes, and then when it happens, it's like, oh shit, they actually did it, because Randy survived the first movie, and he says, I'm so glad that I was a virgin, or something like that. And then I think in 3, we learned that he lost his virginity in college. So it's a great spin on that whole thing where it's like, oh, you lost your virginity, you got to die now. But I don't know, what did you guys think of Randy's death initially? And did you change your mind over time? Or
I mean, it's definitely a sad death because he becomes one of the beloved characters and he's with us on the whole journey for 2. But I think, like you were saying, Varel, if one has to go, like, how much more could they do with Randy? Because he is just the movie buff for a lot of the movie, where he knows all these facts and he is trying to solve these murders, but he is mostly just the fact guy. So how did and he comes back in Scream 3 and he has that little moment on the video, but yeah, like how do you progress a character that it doesn't have as much to him beyond the fact that he is the movie guy. So
yeah.
It's almost like they could foreshadow how little he would have to say in Scream 3 and 4. What would he talk about?
Right.
But it was necessary, it was shocking. But at least what? He got a great death. Like when Ghostface jumps out of the van, like that really got me. It still gets me when I see it. Like I was watching it actually earlier this morning. I was just going through watch Scream 1, watch the greatest hits to the others, and I was like, oh man, I forgot how effective the scene is, and they do well. Like it's this cool, like wide open space, in daytime. So it's an unexpected and really great kill, and like he went out pretty well, if all things considered.
Yeah, I totally agree there. I want to talk really quick about the soundtrack for these movies, because I actually think the score for the first Scream is atypical, meaning that it's actually very good, because a lot of horror movies just don't have great scores. They're usually very generic. The first movie, the score was actually great, and in this one, they obviously reused a lot of the themes. But I thought it was funny because they reused a lot of music from the movie Broken Arrow, this like '90s John Travolta, Christian Slater genre movie, that I was a huge fan of. And I remember watching Scream 2, and I don't remember the context, but I do remember going, why does this music sound so familiar? And it was Broken Arrow. And it's like they just lifted whole musical sequences from that from that movie and put it in Scream 2. I always thought that was funny. But yeah, I mean, this Scream 2 is it's actually long. I mean, it's long, a little bit longer than Scream 1. I've always been surprised at how long the Scream movies end up being. I don't have a problem with that, but I do think that Scream 2, there's a lot in it. There's a lot going on. There's new characters, and slasher movies generally tend to be pretty short, 90 minutes. So I think the length of the Scream movies is pretty refreshing. But yeah, I mean, there's some deaths. Sarah Michelle Gellar gets killed. There's some mystery. There's some suspense, and then we get to towards the end. There's this great sequence in the car with the two. I don't know if they were detectives or whatever, but they were protecting Sydney, and they're driving her to this safe house or wherever it is, and then one of the greatest sequences in the Scream franchise happens in this scene where the car, I think Ghostface comes out of nowhere, and I don't think they either hit him or they stop or something, and then no, they stop at a light, and then Ghostface slashes one of the guy's throats, and then I think the other guy tries to run him over, and it's just it's almost like an action sequence. It's awesome, and then the killer gets knocked out, and then Sydney and her roommate have to climb out of the back of the patrol car and over the killer, which I always thought was like so suspenseful. Even when I was watching it, I was going, and I usually don't do that in horror movies. I don't know. What did you guys think of that car scene?
Yeah, I love the suspense that's created in that, because you don't know if he's gonna or she, because now we have a male and a woman killer, but we don't know if they're gonna wake up, at the moment where she's like right on top of them. But also, why didn't she have the foresight to just grab the mask and to just see who it was? That's what I would have done. I mean, I would have, as I was like climbing, I probably would have been like, "Who are you?" Because you're clearly unconscious. But yeah, I think it's a great scene.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's such a suspenseful, such an awesome scene. It just, I don't know. It's like I just can't stop like marveling over Wes Craven. You're like, he does, even it is an action scene, like, and he just does like a very small, quiet Drew Barrymore scene, just loads that with suspense and makes it so thrilling. And then he does something bigger and is able to achieve the same effect. Like, I know it's not a secret, how good Wes Craven is, but like when you really start looking at it and start examining it, like, scene by scene, movie by movie, it's like, man, this guy was able to just do so many things so well, and it was just complete mastery of visual storytelling, and it's just so fun to watch. It's so fun to watch how good he was. It just that scene is a really prime example of just how great his work can be.
Yeah, and you could tell how well he's well read too, because there's so many nuances in all of his whole canon of film, of like hints that he drops in because he was a professor and everything, that he knows everything that he's talking about, and every detail is there for a purpose, and it all comes together so nicely. And there's so many filmmakers that don't do that, and I think a lot of slasher films fall flat because they are just very one note, they're very surface, but he really takes the time to read and craft and build in those layers in that way.
Yeah, I often forget that he was a professor. Yeah, he's a really smart guy, or was a really smart guy.
Well, and it shows too, really quick, like that you can be like, I love movies like that show like the film can have a high IQ and still be wildly entertaining and fun. And Wes showed us that. The best show us that all the time. The best filmmakers show us like, look, this can work and be fun and effective. Like, I feel like there's this thing that like genre doesn't need to elevate itself. And I mean, people say like elevate genre. There's this kind of like thought that it doesn't need to do it. And there is something like, you can make just like a regular slasher, and myself included, horror fans be like, yeah, great. But if you look at it as a film, you're like, like, I don't know that it's, like if you're judging it by the language and qualifications of like cinema, but like Wes just in terms of like, not just as a horror movie, but as a movie. And I think everyone knows what I mean. Like they are just amazing. They're amazing, smart movies, regardless of genre, regardless of anything. And he does that. He does it time and time. Did it for, I don't know how many, 40 years, 30 plus years, whatever. And yeah, he's just one of the greatest.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we get to the end, that reveal that it's Mickey the killer and all this stuff, that's when the Scream films start to get into the motivation aspect. And that's something people wonder is, okay, what's going to be the motivation to this time of the killer? And the originals, it was twofold. It was revenge for, what Billy had to go through with his parents. And then with Stu, it was just like a good old fashioned having fun and maybe getting famous. And this one, it's Mickey basically playing off of the celebrity murder trials like OJ and wanting to sort of mirror that and the sensationalist aspect of it. And his thing was he was going to blame movie violence. He said, he was going to say the movies made me do it. As opposed to the first movie where Billy says, don't you blame the movies. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative. And this is a sort of a twist on that. So I have mixed feelings about Mickey as the killer. I think I love Timothy Olyphant, but I think he did the best job of the sequel killers in terms of just kind of mirroring the first movie as much as he could in terms of that just sort of crazy unhinged aspect. I think no one is going to top why am I blanking on Billy's name, the actor? Skeet Ulrich, or is that right? Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to top what he did in that, but Timothy Olyphant did a good job. But yeah, it just starts this whole thing about each movie having its own, the killers having their own movie motivated or media motivated motivations for doing what they do. So, and then, Debbie Salt, Billy's mom, Mrs. Loomis comes in, and I always thought that was, I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. At the time, I was kind of like, oh, okay, this is kind of interesting. I just loved Scream 2, the ending, more for the set piece aspect and Craven's direction and how over the top it is. I wasn't a super huge fan of the killer reveal. I thought it was fine for what it was, but I thought, why is Billy's mom running around in a Ghostface costume? That just never made sense to me. And if she wanted to kill Sydney so bad, why not just corner her somewhere? Why not find out where her dorm is, or just, you know what I mean? Like, just like get her, hey, can I just interview you for a second and just shank her? I mean, I don't know. Like, just, I always thought it was, I don't know, just that reveal to me while it kind of made sense from a revenge aspect, it made little sense to me from a Ghostface aspect, because that is a very deliberate thing to put on a Ghostface outfit and go around killing people. Who isn't Sydney when all you want to do is get revenge on Sydney? You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just I was just kind of questioning that. But I don't know. What do you guys think of the reveal?
Yeah, this is I think this is an important part of the franchise, because if you end Scream at 2, like there's nothing else after 2, this ends there. This ending is like, okay, I buy it, fine, but because we have 3, 4, and 5, it diminishes 2 in a weird way, because now it's like, oh, we're doing this again. Like, that's the kind of like the whole thing of it is like you said, like you got to have like the one characters at this and the one characters at that, and they did it. They like kind of did their best to replicate Stu and Billy. Obviously, you have Billy, you have Mrs. Loomis, you have Stu, you have Mickey, like you see the foil and it works, right? Once one time, you get to do that. They do it like 3 more times, but like it's funny, like what you said about Ghostface, like going through Scream 1, the Ghostface thing worked. Every single murder made total sense. The high schoolers murder their principal, the girl that dumped him, like the murders make a lot of sense. Like here it's like, why did they do all this stuff? I mean, at this point, the most meta thing Ghostface can do is don't do it. It's never worked. Like realize no Ghostface has been successful. Like, so
Good point.
yeah. I mean, but like, yeah, this is where you start to get the fissures, because now it's become a they created a template, and that was probably the worst thing they could do. If if two somehow upended what one did in the conclusion instead of having a mirror, I think that would have helped the franchise, because then it would have been more impulse to like, but again, Joe, like Jolene said, there's like the time problem that they really are just not giving enough time to do these things, that like, so the end just becomes, okay, who's going to be the duo? How are they going to foil? How's 4 going to foil 3? How's 5? You know, etc. And like the franchise has been locked in this conclusion. We know it's going to be 2. We know it's going to what the vaguely motivations are. It's just a matter of who it's going to be. And 2 kind of create that template, and it obviously not intentionally, but like it really did do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they almost created the tropes that they were commenting on. They became like part of the system. I always found 2 to be very Friday the 13th, because she kind of looks like Pamela Voorhees. She has a very similar haircut. She's in that cream blazer. Pamela Voorhees is in that cream sweater. So she's a little, and she's taking revenge on her son. So she's a little Pamela Voorheesy, but I think by pairing her up with Mickey, it's not as effective Pamela Voorhees. So, and I could kind of make the argument where, like, you know how you were saying, Farrah, earlier, why didn't she just corner her and like ask her for an interview? And I think because Sydney was being watched the whole time, it was almost like how Pamela Voorhees was trying to teach all of the counselors a lesson by one-offing them one at a time. So I think she was maybe trying to teach them a lesson. Maybe she watched a little too many horror movies, but yeah, now that they have this template, it is just the same. It's like a factory now, Scream Factory.
Yeah. I mean, once you start, yeah, you do have to be careful getting into logic too much with these movies, because it does become kind of, well, you know, it's a movie, and obviously a lot of things are just done for dramatic purposes. But let's see here. Yeah, I want to get into Scream 3 now. And Scream 3 rewatch. So okay, I've always had a soft spot for Scream 3. But I was always kind of, you know, going back and forth about what I think of it in terms of all the other sequels, and rewatching it last week. Now I know it's my favorite Scream sequel. Haters be damned. I don't care. I love Scream 3. I think Scream 3 is just amazing. Scream 3 was not written by Williamson. It was written by Aaron Kruger. It actually came out in 2000, I believe. Which is a few years. They gave it a few years to breathe. And Scream 3, I do remember going to see in the theater with my friends, and you know, everybody was really excited. Another Scream sequel, and a lot of people were disappointed. I initially enjoyed it. I didn't know what to totally make of it, because a lot of it does it's a very fast-paced sequel. It almost blends sort of action comedy with like horror comedy. But I love it. I think Aaron Kruger's script is great. I think he did the best he could under the circumstances. I think his script feels a lot more like a Scream movie than Scream 5. I think he retains the playfulness that Williamson and Craven brought to the table that I felt was absent from Scream 5. I feel like I always felt like Williamson's jokes were more intelligent than funny, although I do laugh at them. I feel that Aaron Kruger's jokes are more outright comedic, but still retain that sort of intelligent wit and intelligence. So I laugh at Scream 3 more than I laugh at any of the other Scream movies, including the first one. It's so over the top. I love how it feels almost like a Scooby-Doo episode. Speaking of Scooby-Doo, you're talking about Matthew Lillard earlier. I love how they introduced this clever thing with the voice thing. Now it's you could switch voices and make it a different person. I thought that was really clever. I think this one, Scream 3, is more satirical. It's taking the franchise to its logical conclusion, I felt, which was Hollywood, because that's where all these tropes originate. It's Hollywood. So where else do you go in the third movie? I felt like if you're gonna make a third one, if you had to, this was the most logical thing to do. I love Dewey and Gale in this. I love Parker Posey. I think she's absolutely incredible. I've always liked her, but I watched it last week, and I kept paying attention to her more than I usually do. And I was like, she's the Matthew Lillard of this movie. She's doing things that she's almost like she's in a different movie. Not that in a bad way, but she knows what movie she's making, and she's just going with it. I think her timing is brilliant. I think she's just great. And I was sad when she died. I love little things, how she, you know, I'm just laughing thinking about it. They're at her house, and then she's got her bodyguard, and then she just randomly leaps into his arms. And she's doing the damsel in distress thing, and she's doing the play on it because she knows that it's a Scream movie, but she's doing it anyway. You know, and little thing, they almost feel like improv moments. So I don't know. I mean, I want to get y'all's general thoughts on Scream 3. What you think? I know, you know, a lot of people aren't fans, but I just love it.
I like this movie. I don't mind it. I was we were talking about Scream on my own podcast too, and our guest that we had on, he said that even if it's a bad Scream movie, it's still a good movie as far as like horror movies go. So I think even if you still get a bad Scream movie, you do still get a good movie out of it. I like that we don't tie, because you know, places become characters as well in these in horror movies in general. So I like that it's not tied to a specific place. So it kind of makes these murders a little bit creepier because they can happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be exclusively Woodsboro. What I like about it is that, you know, it's like subtly a Me Too movie before the Me Too movement, where like the Weinstein signed off on this movie, but it was really a movie about skeezy men in Hollywood, like taking advantage of women. And like, how did they not? I mean, they probably didn't read it or watch it, but you know, like they didn't even realize that that's the movie that was being made. And like how women, you know, how people go to Hollywood to live their dreams, and then it's not this like glittery tinsely town that gets marketed to you. So I like those elements of it. I think Gail has the most of an arc in this story because she's doing all of the legwork in this movie with Parker Posey's character. And yeah, I appreciate it. I like this movie.
Yeah, I mean it's fine. Like it's a movie I know it gets pummeled often. I think kind of unfairly. Like, you know, there's a weird kind of conversation you have to have. Like you said, like given the circumstances, if they had to do a Scream 3, I guess it's the best version of it. You don't have to do a Scream 3. You know, is the underlying message. It's like, look, if you don't have anything to draw from the well, just, you know, don't throw it down the bucket, you know, like, but they did, and this is what we got. And it's fine. I mean, I think like it's hard because the premise, like, again, now you're starting to really, the elasticity that they're pulling on this is like, mom was an actress and she was in these movies, and you're like, what? Like it's kind of, it's just it's absurd. Movies in general, you know, we all love absurd movies, but there is those things now that you're really starting to fairly use the word fatigue. You're starting to see the fatigue. You're starting to see like them really trying to pull, like the pretzels just starting, and like we're like by 5, the pretzels just is not even a pretzel shape anymore. I don't know what it is, but like the pretzel is getting really complicated in ways to keep this centered around Sydney's life while also push her off to the sides. It's doing like this weird thing where it's like, we have to keep her as the nucleus, but we have to use her even less. You know, I also understand that there's like scheduling problems. So that was also another factor that kept her kind of away. And just the cast not being together. They're not really together that often. You know, Dewey and Gail are, and Sydney's kind of in her own movie. But it's still fun. There's still cool stuff to it. The Hollywood stuff is fun. Like, I think the inevitability, like you said, going to Hollywood, having the skeezy look at Hollywood was very appropriate. So there's stuff in here that works, especially after seeing 4 and 5. I appreciate 3 a lot more. But like, it's just starting to wear thin. It's starting to get exhausted. You know, like it doesn't have the same engine that a slasher movie does, where it's like, look, we have this singular, everlasting, supernatural character, and we can put them into new designs and try to be, you know, do different things with that. It doesn't have that. You have to have people who have motivations, who have a mystery, and like, it's harder to do that every time you do it. And 3, you start to see really how hard it is at this point.
Yeah, a lot of what people don't like about the movie is what I like about it. I like how, you know, like you take this idea that, you know, these are Gail and Dewey's movies at this point, and Sydney is just kind of there. But the thing is, she's absent for like, you see her in the first half, but she's kind of doing her own thing. And I love how the movie just acknowledges that they have nothing for her, and they don't try to shove her in there. And I like how that, you know, Gail and Dewey are kind of, who are the heart of the franchise, are kind of the heart of this movie. And they're, you know, it's more of a detective story, and it's more, and I just like how absurd that, you know, Sydney's mom being an actress in Hollywood is, because I think they're in on the joke. I think they totally know what that is. I think they know it's stupid, but they're kind of like playing it up. And again, I like, it's like, okay, well, what do you do with slashers now? You know what I mean? So if you have to make a third movie, do you make it just straight up slasher? No, you make an absurd going back to Hollywood, you know, romp, you know what I mean? And it's almost an action movie at certain points. Or Craven, and I think a lot of it is saved by Craven. I don't think it's a super great script, but I think Craven does save the movie with his direction, because he's always great. He's always great with set pieces, and there's a lot of sequences in this movie that play on the set piece as an idea, which I love, which is, you know, not just a set piece, but the idea of a set piece, meaning that movie set that they're on. And I love the whole sort of doppelganger aspect, where every those actors that are making the Stab sequel are mirroring the characters in the movie. And that set is the old Stu's house set from the first movie in Sydney. And there's a sequence in there where she's running from the killer like she was in the first movie. I think it's playing with all that stuff, and I just love it. And I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. That's fine. But I do think it's my favorite Scream of the Scream sequels. I'd like two, but to me, three just gets me more. You know what I mean? It makes me laugh more. I just love watching it. But anyway, the opening sequence, you know, again, it's different. And it's another thing I like, is it's not the traditional, you know, well, in the first movie it's Drew Barrymore, in the second they're at the theater, but again, it does this different thing where Cotton is driving, and he's talking about his, you know, movie deals and all this stuff, and then this killer calls him as a different voice, and then he has to go and save his girlfriend. Yeah, I like that. I like the opening. It's almost like an action sequence. It's like a car chase. He's like driving through the streets of Hollywood and skidding and almost getting hit, and you know, he's sweating, and it's almost like I just thought that was great. And then we get to Cotton's place, and his girlfriend is being stalked, and you know, on the other side of the door, it sounds like Cotton is like, open the door, and it's the killer, and it's like, oh, this is actually kind of different. So I don't know, what do you guys think of that opening?
I think it works because it is so different, because we have, you know, the first one with Drew Barrymore, obviously it's like what Michael was saying, where it's like smaller, and then the second one we went bigger, and then this one just kind of did a 180 from both of those formulas, and it's a different formula, and Cotton is now the victim, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that like he was able to build his career up so robustly after he was acquitted for murder and rape. Yeah.
Quite the Cinderella story.
I love the title of the show, 100% Cotton. I think it's so funny. And the thing about that opening too is it's a little bit of a play on the first Stab movie, because in the first Stab movie, Heather Graham is taking a shower, and she is about to take a shower, but then she like gets distracted and the killer's around. And then in the third movie, Khan's girlfriend is taking a shower. So it's almost like a little bit of play on that, which I thought was really interesting. And that scene has like it brings back memories, because like there's a Creed, Christian rock band called Creed. They have a song in that sequence, and my friends were big Creed fans, and I just remember hearing that song again, and it would take me back to that time period. And it's just how cheesy and over the top that, I don't know why I'm getting into this Creed diatribe, but it's just it fits so well, because that movie is such a time capsule of late 90s, early 2000s. But I do love how Sydney in this one, she's actually kind of developed. I mean, even though she's sidelined in the first half, she's a crisis counselor. You know, she's trying to help people. In the second movie, she was a theater major or an acting major, and then this one, she's holed up somewhere in a compound. And she's a crisis counselor, and I thought that was really, 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 really interesting. And I thought it was interesting how they kind of take her acting aspirations and put, you know, sort of transplant that and put that on her mom for this backstory. But yeah, Sydney, I mean, she's sidelined a little bit, but she's got some development. I mean, there's something there. She's not. I thought she was more developed in Scream 3 than she was in Scream 5. I'll put it that way.
Yes. Yes. But you know what's cool about this movie too, and like, I know it's this just a general thought, but like, what you said, Jolene, like both of you, what you're saying, like really kind of like makes me think like the opening. Now, granted, they did make the template for the conclusion, so that's just what Scream became, and it's just the expectation almost. But the opening sequence, they do different stuff, and the movie is a different thing. This movie is, like you said, Farrell, it's like a kind of a murder mystery investigation. They're more active and being like,
Right.
instead of just kind of waiting for the killer and what's going on, they're really active, especially Gail and Parker Posey. It was just, oh goodness, man, so great. The scene, Julie, you mentioned one scene. There's another scene. There's a great scene where she's like, they're yelling at Lance Henriksen, and she's like, she goes into Gail and she starts like yelling, and Gail's like, enough. But Parker is so awesome in that moment, like so perfect. But the point is that like, despite it not being the best script, despite like it having its problems, having its fatigue, it's having like they're stretching out, you can see Wes still doing interesting stuff in it. He's trying to get new and different things in there, as much as like there's really hard to pull it out just because it's the third movie in like 4 years or whatever. What you see the twist then with 4 and 5, you can see the studio being like, it has to take place in Woodsboro, it has to have Sydney, it has to do this. You can see the studio notes just like clamping down on this franchise, and they're literally like 4 is 1 and 5 is 4. Like they're literally just at this point just remaking. You know, we can talk about that more, but it's a testament at least to 3. Shit, man, at least it's trying. You know, like I'll give it that all day long.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, I just laugh all the time because 3 has one of my favorite lines, because they talk about Cotton's death. The 2 detectives are at the movie set, and the producer and the director, Roman, they're saying like, oh, what does, you know, Cotton's death have to do with our movie? And he's like, one of the detectives is like, he was making a movie called Stab. He was stabbed. And the way he delivers that line is great. I just think it's so funny. But yeah, I mean, again, by the time you get to 3, it's like, well, what do you do? And it's like, to me, they just kind of took it to its logical conclusion. I do think there are a lot of clever kills in this one. I like the scene with the Jenny McCarthy. Am I saying it right? Yeah, Jenny McCarthy, another 90s staple. Again, you see the whole sort of popularity of the Scream franchise growing, because every popular sort of name actor wants to be in it. But she gets killed, and I love how she's running from the killer, and then like she's trying to grab a knife, and it ends up being like a rubber knife because it's a prop, and she throws it away, and then she's talking about, you know, she's like, you know, stabs. I don't know if they're on part 4 or 5 or 6. I don't remember, but she's like, stab 5. Jesus, I got to get a new agent. Like she's, you know, kind of, and then they're riffing on the fact that sequels suck and nobody should want to be in them, but they're making a sequel. Yeah, I mean, you know, once you get to that Parker Posey's character's house, I think a lot of great things happen there. I love the sequence where the killer is actually sending faxes, and they're having to read the pages of the new script, because one of the jokes in Hollywood is they're always changing scripts, they're always rewriting them. So these rewritten pages that are supposed to be mirroring the Stab movie, but it's sort of telling the order in which these characters get killed. Those things are being faxed, and they're reading them as they're having to, like, you know, worry about the killer that's around going to kill them. And then they go outside, and then like he reads, you know, something about smelling gas, but he can't see, so he lights his lighter, and then the place blows up. And the movie's full of little clever things like that, even though it is a little bit over the top. And I like how there's actual detective work in it. You know, there are 2 real detectives. Patrick Dempsey's a great actor. I thought he was a great stand-in for, I don't know, it was interesting because he was kind of like, he's a bit heartthrobby, in that you think he's gonna maybe hook up with Gail or Sydney, or he could be the potential new kind of like Mickey or Billy. But it turns out to just be a really good detective. And yeah, I mean, you know, and I love, well, I won't say I love, but I kind of have mixed feelings about Randy coming back in the tape. I thought that was a little hokey, a little convenient, but I like the mechanism by which he comes back is an actual videotape, which is something that plays off of the first movie, where he's describing the rules of horror while they're watching a videotape. And then the third one, he comes back on a videotape. I thought that was interesting. And his sister, Heather Monserrato, I think her name is, Again, another sort of who's who of 90s, which I thought was great. What do you think of that Randy returning on the videotape scene?
I think it's befitting to who Randy is, you know, like he's now immortalized in his own world. Maybe it's not Hollywood world where he's in a big movie, but he's immortalized himself on this tape for his friends and to help them and protect them and whatnot. But I just want to go back to Patrick Dempsey's character,
Yeah,
because I actually don't like him in this movie. I think he's like too, because they're trying to kind of put the blame on him for parts of it. So it's like, oh, did he do it? And he doesn't ever drop the creepy, because even at the end when we see him in the house and he's getting shot at and he's getting tied up, he's still kind of creepy. And I'm like, okay, we know it's not you. Can you drop that? And I feel like he just doesn't ever do that the whole film. He's just like that one note.
Yeah, it feels like it's like one of those cases where they got like 3/4 of the script and nobody knew who the killer was, so he was just always playing the killer. But it would have been better, like what Farrell says, if he just played like straight up a nice guy, and we're all as an audience watching being like, that's the guy, that's the guy. And it just turns out, because everyone in this franchise is so cynical, and because we're so cynical, it's like, oh no, he was just a nice guy. Like, that would have been pretty great, you know?
Yeah. Well, that kind of starts to get into part 4, which we'll talk about in a minute, where they start saying how the cliches become the new standard. Because the old standards are so known, the cliches start becoming the new standard. So it's like, well, how do you do, like, where do you go if it's like, if you're just sort of using all that stuff? But anyway, we'll get into part 4, but I just wanted to talk about, I miss Carrie Fisher. I love seeing her in this movie. I think it's great because they're like, hey, are you? She's like, no, I know I look like her, but you know, I didn't get the part. It was the actress who wanted to sleep with George Lucas got the part. So it's going into the whole casting couch thing. And it's Carrie Fisher because I love Carrie Fisher. There's we already talked a little bit about that, the house set, Stu's house, the movie set where they have that sequence. But I wanted to talk a little bit about how this movie is, I think it's the only Scream movie with one killer. Is that right? Yeah, it's the only Scream movie with one killer, which I actually really liked, because I was like, the 2 killer thing is it's getting too, I don't know, to me, it just doesn't work, because first of all, when you have 2 killers, they're always basically acting the same. They're acting psycho. You know, there's no contrast. There's nothing like that. There's no yin and yang. So I liked in this movie how it was just one killer. I thought, I mean, I don't know. I thought the reveal in this was kind of hokey. It's like, okay, it's a long lost brother. But again, I think they are aware of that stuff, and I think that they're playing off of it rather than just putting stupid things in this movie. And I do like, I think his name is Scott Foley. Is it the actor?
It is. It is. It was okay. Felicity's boyfriend.
That's right. Yeah. Another 90s. I'm kind of surprised that they didn't have her in this movie. Yeah, no, I think the reveal's fine. I like the third act. I love that giant house, and it's another set. He's a master of set pieces. Craven is just shooting the hell out of that thing. There's all these rooms and all these things. And I think the reveal is okay. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It sort of becomes very Scooby-Doo in nature, because you have that big house, you have these secret passages, and then it's like, okay, now we have to try to find the man in the mask or whomever. So I think it's effective and it works, and we get the classic Sydney silhouette of the crop jacket with the top and the black jeans that she wears for now until forever through the rest of the franchise. So there's that. So I do like the nod though to her boyfriend who died, because she's wearing his fraternity's necklace, which she's wearing in 2. So she comes back wearing that again. So that's kind of a nice nod that she's still holding on to him. But yeah, I like the house. Yeah.
Yeah, it worked. I mean, it goes to the point, you know, like, again, and I misspoke earlier because I said there's always gonna be 2, but I forgot there's 1 in here. But like, it's tough. It's one of those things, like, again, it's like, if you have to do it, this is what you do, right? This is what you do. You make it outlandish, to a degree outlandish. I don't think it's too outlandish, you know, but you do what they did. And again, you have to, I'm sure there's some, whatever reason you have to tether it to Sydney. So there's, you know, it's gotta be somebody, right? So why not a long lost brother, you know, like, so that you're just doing the best you can. I think, like, you know, clearly everyone involved knew like there's a degree of ridiculousness to this, that it's the long lost brother and mom was an actress, but it's like, hey, there is at least a in franchise narrative consistency. And fair, I think that's what you're talking about. Like, it's like, yeah, they would go to Hollywood and it would be revolving around the Stamp franchise, and to per the how you know Scream looks and feels, this makes sense. It all checks out, and they got this in before it's had to turn back to, we're just going to keep kind of redoing one, you know. And yeah, I mean, I guess like I said, as I never really disliked it, but now watching it again, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty good, you know. Like, it's not my favorite, but also I think there is some cool stuff and cool performances, and there's enough to enjoy that's still like, this is okay.
Yeah, Scream 3 has my favorite ending of all the movies, where they're gonna go watch a movie. They're at Sydney's place, and the door swings open, like the back door, and she looks at it, and then she just lets it stay open. I always love that ending. That's my favorite ending because it kind of
Yeah.
shows where she is as a character. You know,
Well, especially if you think this was supposed to be the last. This was supposed to be like, they
Right.
were like,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
is
yeah.
it. And it was
Exactly.
a perfect, like,
Yeah.
she's overcome her stuff. She's not afraid anymore. It was a nice conclusion.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is actually the first time we ever see Sydney in a skirt or a dress or any that isn't a nightgown, because like, so it's very like, and it's a wrap skirt and it's very freeing and it's very liberating, and she doesn't have those layers on anymore, and she's got sandals
Mhm.
on, and you know, her hair's back in a nice clip. So it is very like, you know, this is it. She's gone through her journey, she's done her trials, and she's overcome, you know, those demons. So
Yeah.
I think they could have ended it here.
Yeah, but they chose not to, because it's making a lot of money. So that brings us to Scream 4, which is was supposed to be start of a new trilogy. Williamson is back. He wrote the screenplay, and from what I've heard, this was supposed to be the start of a new trilogy. Craven unfortunately died after part 4, so he was not able to sort of complete that. So they kind of scrapped those ideas, but you can kind of see that being set up. My main thing about Scream 4 was I always felt like it didn't know what it wanted to be. Was it going to be a sequel or a reboot? I always felt it was a little bit confused about what it was trying to do, as opposed to 3, which I felt like was a very singular movie that knew exactly what they were doing. So this is, yeah, it's the start of a new trilogy. But the thing is, Sydney's still around. So, you know, another criticism I have is that, you know, she's, again, what do you do with Sydney? They try and do stuff, you know, but to me, it just never totally came together. You know, I think Neve Campbell does the best she can with the material. I still think she's good in it, but I just never, it almost felt like Gail was driving the narrative more than Sydney, which to me, if you're going to have Sydney be the protagonist, doesn't make sense to me. I kind of felt like she. Okay, so at the end of part 2, she agrees to the Diane Sawyer interview, and then that's why Cotton shoots Debbie Salt. And I like that because it's kind of a cynical take, and it shows that she's a little bit of an opportunist. You know what I mean? Even though she's kind of like not trying to die either. But it was a little bit of play on that. In part 4, I feel like they kind of took that a little bit too far, and they made her, because she's, you know, she's writing books now. She's, you know, she's got her own sort of celebrity thing going, and she's different. You know, I this is the first movie where I didn't totally like what they kind of were doing with Sydney, even though I know they had to do something, but it just felt almost like they were letting Gail lead the franchise and where it was going in terms of character more than Sydney. But you know, Scream 4, it's out of all the movies, I love the way it's shot the most in terms of the cinematography. It feels more like almost like an Italian horror movie rather than a slap, like just a straight, because the Scream movies they've all been shot on film. I think that one 4 was shot on digital, but it's got this really weird color palette that everybody was commenting on the time. It's like, why does it look like this? And I always thought it was like, oh, this is him playing on the graphic nature of, you know, the sort of the violent nature of these movies. And almost making it like this garish kind of like over the top visual palette. And I really like that. But I don't know, what are you guys' overall thoughts on Scream 4?
I feel like this is the part, and I was talking to someone about this recently. This is the point that's going to divide the Scream fans, I think, like, because the plot of Scream henceforth, as far as we know, with 4 and 5, the plot of Scream movies is Scream, like it's just Scream now. Like, this is what Scream is, and we're just going to give you more Scream. And if you're one of the people who are just like, hey, I love Scream, and what, I just want to see Scream again and again in some kind of sort of altered form, then hey, you're going to like these movies. That's fine. It's Scream, and it's giving you Scream, but if you're there because the side that I'm on is like, hey, if you were going to do Scream 4, if you're going to do Scream 5, which I had high hope for, like, you're going to reinvigorate the franchise. Like, the ideas, if you're going back to that one camp, is like, hey, I'm just going to watch Sydney till she's 70 doing this shit, like, I'm going to watch Gail. You're not going to watch Dewey anymore, spoilers, but like, or maybe, who knows, like, but like, if you want to be there for like what Scream was, like, yes, there are great characters, and that doesn't mean you can't create new great characters, but like the original Scream was like this, like, again, turning it inside out, being like, horror is this fun, cool thing. Let me show you how, let me show you what we can do. Let me show you how you can talk about it while also being effective. Like, all these different things, like, you can no longer do that with Sydney's story. Sydney's story is an anchor on everything that is cool in one. Sydney and all of them has become an albatross to that very thing. You can't do both anymore. I'm firmly convinced if someone does it, it'll be a miracle. I've yet to see it, and you cannot do both. So like, 4 becomes to me almost fan fiction at this point. It's just continuing Sydney through these preposterous scenarios to keep this going, without the, like, in 3 that at least had like the, we know we're preposterous, screw it kind of attitude, taking it very seriously. And it's just, to me, not fun. I'm not going to say it's not Scream, because I'm not going to define what the franchise should be. There's 2 parts to it. I think these 2 halves. What I would like to see is like taking that intelligence and putting it in a new package. There's nothing to say you can't have all new characters completely. Just leave Sydney alone and take that intelligence and run with it in a new and interesting way. They're yet to do it, and 4 is when I feel like they've really cemented, like, Scream is just going to be Scream, and that's it. And it's going to be a version of Scream that like takes away some of the best things that were part of 1.
Yeah, I mean, I don't truly like fully hate this one, but there are good elements to it. But there's a lot of stuff that I'm not a fan of the way that they do it, because then it becomes repetitive. It just becomes like, okay, well, this is a Scream movie, so you need to have this, and you need to, let's talk about Stab again. Let's talk about these elements. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Emma Roberts. I don't really like her. There's like some meta stuff with it where I liked that they talked about the idea of like live streaming and uploading your life. I thought that was really clever, because that's, Wes Craven was always kind of ahead of the curve with where people were going culturally. So for him to comment on that in 2011 and have that kind of take over a few years down the line, I thought was really interesting. But yeah, this one is the weakest for me out of all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, Scream 4 is kind of unfortunate to me, because I feel like it, in context of the franchise, it feels the most out of place, because it was the start of apparently a new trilogy, and then they scrapped it. So it feels like it doesn't belong anywhere. It doesn't. I don't know. Yeah, it's really strange. But I do think it has some redeeming qualities. Like, the opening sequence is my favorite opening besides the first one. This sort of movie within a movie thing, because I think Scream 4 came out at a time where they'd had enough distance from the franchise to start commenting on different trends. And I like how it opens, where it's like, oh, okay, this is Scream. This is the opening as we're used to seeing. And like, no, this is 2 characters watching a stab movie. but then that becomes another stab movie, and then it's the opening to Scream. I like that fake out. I thought it was good. I didn't once you actually get to the actual movie Scream opening, I didn't think that was as effective as the other ones. It felt a little old hat. Craven does the best he can. I think he's really good at doing this stuff, but I think even he started to maybe run out of ideas. You know, I don't know. It feels like, I actually think the opening to Scream 5 is more clever and better, even though I have my issues with that movie. I think the opening to that is better than this opening to a degree. I like how it starts, but I don't necessarily like how it finishes. What do y'all think of the opening?
Oh, sorry.
The dog wants to talk about it.
I think I'm not a huge fan of like movies that repeat themselves. Like I can't do Groundhog's Day. I can't do like I just need to, I'm so sorry. Sleepy Hush. Like I'm a person that like I need to get to the point of this story, and I know that some of those kinds of stories are like that is the point of them. But I don't know, like I feel like it's hard to when you track then like early millennium horror movies, and then you have this whole torture porn like craze that happens in the mid 2000s. Like what else can you do? Because now we've been kind of shown everything at this point. Like we've seen toes get cut off, we've seen eyes get ripped out, we've seen, you know, like we've seen it all. And then before that, we didn't really see that much, or things were more hinted to or alluded to. It wasn't just shown on screen. So I think, you know, Craven was working with the best that he could in the circumstances, because he did this right after he did Red Eye, and Red Eye is a completely different film where it's like very compartmentalized. It's on a plane. It's very, you know, suspenseful. And then, you know, coming off of that, coming back to Scream, it's hard to kind of slip back into that slasher subgenre that made the 80s and the 90s so popular in that way. So
Yeah, like I said, you know, when you run out of ideas, you start deconstructing old ones, and I think that's a sign that you need to move on. I think everything that needed to be said about Scream was said in the first movie. Even though I do really love the sequels, the first two or first two sequels anyway. I think everything that was needed to be said was said in the first movie, but I feel like, yeah, exactly. What do you do at this point? I feel like that's a sign when you start doing meta deconstructions of things. That's a sign that you need to move on and either create a whole new genre. Even though I think genres are created accidentally. You know, I think it just, you know, like in the 80s or the late 70s with, you know, the slasher craze. I don't think they were thinking let's create a new genre. It was just like this is what's on our minds. We love these elements of certain movies. Let's just do this movie. And that's how stuff gets started. And I think and that wasn't in the studio system. That was just, you know, guys scrounging money together. I mean, Halloween was an independently financed movie. So yeah, so I think it's going to take that again. I think it's going to take hungry filmmakers who are not necessarily in the system. Maybe they are in the system, but they want to do something a little bit different. So they kind of have to go outside the studios, because the studios are just going to do this they're going to do this ad infinitum. They don't care. They don't give a shit. They will do Scream until the end of time. They even have contracts when you sign certain contracts in Hollywood that say we own the rights to this in this universe and any other universe not yet discovered. They literally have that in contracts. So they have, you know, their goal is to just, you know, run stuff into the ground for money's sake. You know, you can't totally blame them because they are financing movies and it's their job to be the bean counters, but you do have to stop at a certain point and go, look, for the artistic integrity of movies, we need to be pushing things that the studios don't want to push. So I think at this point, something is going to have to happen, because again, with horror movies, it is a lot of just repeats of, you know, even with like Rob Zombie's films, you know, it's a lot of repeating of older stuff from the 70s and the 80s. I even saw a trailer for Ty West's new movie. I think it's called X or something, and it looks like a riff on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you know, mixed in with some other sort of, you know, boonies, low-cal horror movies that I've seen 100 times. So yeah, again, I don't know where you go, but as far as Scream 4 goes, you know, I do think that there are some, again, some interesting things in it. You know, Sydney's in a different place. She does, to her credit, she does seem a bit more mature. But the great thing about her acting is that you can kind of tell that she's uncomfortable with all of it, even though she's putting on this exterior of like poise. And I'm not a costume person, but I think there's at one point she's wearing like a red dress or something where she's going to this book signing or book thing or whatever, and it almost doesn't feel like her. You know what I mean? It just feels like, oh, I can tell she's kind of like she's not Gail. She's not comfortable with this life. So that I kind of feel like they did a good job of doing, you know, kind of giving her something to do, even though they weren't giving her much to do. I don't know. Am I on the mark with that costume comment, Jolene?
Yeah, because I mean, at the end of Scream 3, she's got that really beautiful wrap dress. It's like it's almost Indian in nature. It's very light, it's airy, and then we see her in the opening scene of Scream 4 in this like tight bodycon blue dress. Now we've seen her in blue, but it's very restrictive. It's very angular. It's not who she was when we left Scream 3. She's now a different person, and that is partly because of age, but I think partly the other part of that is she is becoming this person that she doesn't want to become anymore because she's writing books and she's doing all this stuff that's not Sydney. It's more Gail.
Yeah, and I was going to mention one of the things that the movie does do well is sort of, you know, dealing with ideas that are in the current narrative. Back in 2011, it was kind of the beginnings, I felt, of social media. And I mean, social media had been around, but it was still kind of in its infancy, and it started to comment on victimization culture, which is people taking advantage of victimhood. And that's something that I felt, even though my criticism about the Sydney character were that she was kind of doing things out of character, it was a good comment on how people, even good intentioned people, can fall into the victimhood trap and start to capitalize and make money off of it. And that's what she's doing, even though the intent may have been there to kind of, you know, purge her demons, which is great. The idea in Scream 4 was that this wasn't just like a one book thing. It was like a book deal. It was like going to be multiple things. So I thought it was great how they were sort of commenting on the sort of victimization culture that, you know, people prey on these days, and especially agents and publicists. And you know, it's like, oh, hey, who cares about your demons and how scarred you are? Just make money and, you know, capitalize on it. But yeah, and you know, I kind of do like how the publicist is killed like right after Sydney kind of tells her to F off. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Sydney. Again, like I said, I have mixed feelings about her. It feels like there's not much to do with her, but what is being done with her, I felt was semi-interesting. I don't know, Michael, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, you know, it's the overall, I feel like it's the overall sentiment that I walk away from this movie is that her character's fine. Like everything in this movie is fine. It's a capable movie. There's no doubt about it. It's in Wes Craven's hands, and it's hard to say. You know, I feel like there's a case that maybe he wasn't in that great of health. I mean, he passed shortly. I don't know how soon after, but not too long. He was older.
Yeah,
I think you had studio interference. You had a lot of other things in play. But despite that, it's a capable movie. It looks great. Farrell, you said that. It looks great. The Sydney's characters there. Yeah, there's some weird stuff that I'm not crazy about either, but nothing too egregious. You know, Dewey goes and does his thing. Gail does hers. Like everything's fine. Like that's the thing, like, you know, that keeps the engine running. Like we talk about, like I was saying, like of what this franchise is going to be. They're not going to make movies that are bad in the sense that they're poorly done. They're going to have a budget. They're going to look the way they're supposed to look. They're going to be in capable hands. They're never going to be like, at least I don't think, whoa, was that a universally looked at as a absolute dumpster fire. Like, I don't think it's going to happen. They're going to put enough money and studio power, because it's such a profitable, big franchise, an important franchise to Paramount or whoever owns it. They're going to be capable. And that's Scream 4. It's like, yeah, it's fine. There's nothing terrible about it except for like a dearth of ideas, you know, like, but like, you know, and that's it. And I'm fine. Like, it feels just like you walk away and you're like, yeah, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, that kind of sums up the characters too, because we have a whole new cast. And you know, there's the, you know, again, there's the typical, you got the film geeks, You know, you got the usual suspects of, you know, characters in these type of slasher movies. And I felt like they were trying to a little bit mirror the first film. And I don't know, there was something about this new cast that I just did not care for. The only one that I did like was, what's her name, Hayden, or the girl with the short hair. I can't think of her name.
Oh,
Right
Hayden
now.
Panettiere.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like her.
was one of the few people to me to survive how much I didn't like this movie. I thought she was great. And I kind of think they didn't give her enough to do. Because again, this movie doesn't really kind of know what it wants to be. You've got the legacy characters and their story, and then you've got the new characters trying to sort of build on what's been going on since the first movie. And I think it's a schizophrenic movie in that sense. There's that sequence in the film club where they start talking about, again, it's a typical, you know, we're going to talk about the rules of, you know, remake, as opposed to the other movies that we're talking about the rules of horror and then the rules of sequels and the rules of a trilogy. And now this one's a rule of a reboot or whatever it is, or soft reboot, whatever they call it these days, where the reversals become the new standards, where, you know, the unexpected becomes expected, because it's like, okay, like I think Michael, you were saying earlier, it's like the detective guy from the third movie, you know, if he's too nice, it's like, oh, we know it's going to be him. So you start playing off of that, but then the audience knows you're going to play off of it. So it's like they're already ahead of you. So to me, that scene was like, okay, I get it, but it's like they're just telling me reasons why I shouldn't care, because the whole point was you're supposed to be sort of a participant in these movies, as opposed to like sort of just. Let me put it another way. This is a better way to say it. I don't want to watch slasher movies and horror movies as with a too critical of an eye. I don't want to approach it as a professor, or, you know, just anticipating I'm going to do a video breakdown on it. I want to actually enjoy the movies. So, and that's the great thing about the first one, was that it was commenting on horror movies, but you can enjoy it as its own thing. It worked as it's on its own. I mean, even if you took all the meta stuff out of it, it was still a really effective slasher movie. In this one, it's just not, because it's like, you know, if you, as a sequel, it's just, again, it's repeating a lot of things, and it's, again, telling you reasons why you really shouldn't give a shit anymore, because the movie doesn't really care, because it's like, okay, we're just doing what we're expected to do, but it's okay because we're commenting on it. No, it's not okay because you're
exactly.
Oh,
that's the problem I have. Sorry, this is the big problem I have with 4 and especially 5. It's like, stop pointing out how much this movie is not going to work. 1 for 5, stop talking about movies that are superior to yours. Like, we're talking about the Babadook and Us. I'm like, yeah, I fucking wish I was watching that, you know, like, but like, stop pointing to the idea of how faulty the foundation is, like being like requels don't work. It's like, but that's what you're doing, right. Like, and it's pointing, because you said you don't want to be a film professor, but they keep pointing at it. They keep deliberately pointing at it, and makes you think about it. It makes me think about it, and it just gets me makes these 2 movies, when we get to 5, so exhausting and so frustrating. It's like, stop pointing at it. Like, you have nothing, you're at this point, you don't have anything original to say like the originals, you don't have anything unique, like you're just kind of commenting that whole thing. Stop talking about it. Like, you're not doing yourself any favors. Like, yeah. Sorry.
No, that's great. I want to hear it, because I didn't finish part 4. I started watching it last week, and I didn't finish it because I got to the 3rd act, and I was so bored and I already knew what happened because I had seen it multiple times. Like, I just don't care what happens. Like, I know what's going to happen, but I'm not enjoying the process because it's so about itself that it's not having fun anymore. It's almost like that extreme narcissist that only talks about themselves. So it's like, why am I here if you're just, you know, I'll just leave you alone. Like, so I didn't finish 4. I mean, I got to the 3rd act, didn't finish it. I had written more to say, but I think we've kind of said everything that needs to be said about it. I mean, there's some good stuff in it. I mean, there's just from a pure technical standpoint, it's fine, but I don't want to watch movies for technical, you know, from a technical standpoint. I want to enjoy them. Case in point, not to bring up another movie, just was watching Uncharted yesterday. I went to see it, and it was another example of an exercise rather than an enjoyable experience, where it's like every action sequence is so you can see the pre-visualization of it to the point where it doesn't feel spontaneous. We're like, oh, that's storyboarded and that's pre-vised and that's this and that's that and that's, you know, targeted to a specific area, and this acting beat is, you know, I don't know. It's just Scream. But the thing about Scream that I do like is that it's an indicator of where we are in not only in the culture but also with cinema. And to me, with the first Scream, we knew where we were in the mid to late 90s. You know, horror was not totally working. I mean, there were some things to criticize. There were some enjoyable horror movies, but Scream was the encapsulation of that. Now with Scream 4 and more so into Scream 5, it's indicating that it's time to move on. And even though I have my problems with Scream 4 and Scream 5, I do like the fact that they came out because they're showing people where we need to move, that we need to move on, we need to do something different.
Yeah, and I wonder if that almost contributes to the exhausting factor of them, of like where they're self-deprecating in that way to themselves, that, you know, we're in this internet culture now where anybody can look up any type of information and be a film critic, even if you're not a film critic. And everybody has a platform to say what they want to say about anything. And I wonder if they self-deprecate in that way of like, like, we know what we're doing. We know that we need to move on, and we know that you're going to comment about this, so we're just going to get ahead of you and just, you know, tell you all the things that you're not going to like about this movie, which I can't tell if that's a help or a hindrance for a filmmaker, because yeah, as an artist, I wouldn't want to self-deprecate my work, but yeah,
I think that's a sign we should move on to Scream 5. I kind of feel like we've said everything we need to say about that, and really I think our talk on Scream 5 is going to be fairly short because, well, one, I've only seen it once.
I've got lots to say.
Okay.
This is gonna be a good 3 hours.
Yeah,
so get comfortable,
I'll,
get a snack. No, just kidding.
I'll let you, unleash your fury on it. So Scream 5, I mean, you know, again, it's I think Scream 4 was 2011, Scream 5 came out in 2022. It's been a while. Strangely enough, even though a lot of time has passed, it doesn't feel like the movie took advantage of that. It feels like it was doing things that Scream 4 already did. I didn't particularly like the new cast. I thought they were, I mean, there's always going to be a sense of genericness in these kinds of casts, but I thought they were particularly generic. I don't think there was any character development. Way each other, you can kind of see that. I didn't see any of that in Scream 5. I thought I kind of like the opening, but again, it was darker than usual. And I think the Scream movies have violence, but I've never particularly thought they were dark movies. The Scream 5 is missing the playful aspect that I think is a hallmark of the Scream franchise. It just wasn't there. To me, it felt more like just a random modern horror movie. Well made, maybe on its own, it's pretty good, but I don't judge it like that. It's a Scream sequel, so I'm going to judge it from the perspective of the first movie, which is the best one. And I just don't think it's effective. I thought that the Billy subplot was lame. I don't think the Billy subplot made any more sense than the mother being an actress in the third movie made sense. I don't get how people rag on Scream 3 and love Scream 5. You know what I mean? Like, it's just as absurd, but Scream 5 doesn't know that, and it doesn't acknowledge it. It's not playing off of it. It's almost like a soap opera at this point. It's like, oh, let's just throw in Billy, knock somebody up randomly before he jumped into Sydney's bedroom window. And now that daughter is the protagonist of the new movies. And it's just like, come on, it just doesn't work. I thought that the new cast, there was a certain point where I'm watching Scream 5, when the new cast starts getting killed, I almost forgot they were in the movie. That's how underdeveloped they were. I was like, oh, wait, oh, dude, he's in this movie? Oh, shit. And then he gets killed, and it's like, okay, whatever. And, it's fine. And then they kill Dewey, which I just don't understand. If you're going to, my big problem with this movie was that if you're going to kill a legacy character, I think the only way that Gail works is if Dewey's around. I don't like Gail on her own to a point. I think there's some interesting things about her, but I don't think she works as a lone person. I think she works really well with Dewey, and that the fact that they killed him off to me does not bode well for her. I think Sydney is completely useless. She's basically not in the movie until the end. And then when she gets there, she's a mom, which is a little bit of a development, but they're literally saying as they're going into Stu's house, oh, we've done this before. You know what I mean? We're gonna go try and kill the killer. And are you ready for this? Never. Like it's to them, they're not even scared because they're so used to it. And it's like, I feel like it was a movie maybe trying to comment on that, but it just doesn't work because the playful aspect is just gone. And I didn't like the killer reveal. I thought the two killers were kind of a joke. Poor representations of, Billy and Stu in the first movie. I thought they were over the top without any of the nuance that the other people brought, even Timothy Oliphant. I just didn't like any. There were some things I liked about Scream 5. Overall, I just did not like it. I don't think it's effective, but I don't know what you guys, I know what Michael thinks, but I don't know what Jolene thinks.
So I actually had a pretty good time watching the movie. Obviously there were things about it I didn't like, and I don't know if this is maybe just like what happens when you grow up or just being a millennial, but some of those kids were just really annoying. So I was kind of happy when I saw them often. I mean, I walked away from it from the female perspective of like, wow, women are super powerful. Like things continuously happen to us culturally, politically, whatever. And yet we still fight back. We're still resilient. So those are the elements that I took from that movie that I was like, yes, like that was my Sydney. That was the Sydney that I loved from the first movie, where she was just resilient and just, her and Gail working together and that like sisterhood kind of bond of like, we need to step up and we need to make this happen. I didn't understand the age gap between Jack Quaid's character dating that like high school girl, because he was like 20 something. Why would you? I didn't understand that. I was like, well, I mean, I guess if you're a psychopath, like you don't care about age, but I did not understand that age gap at all. Yeah, I don't know. Like I did like it. I had a good time watching it, but reflecting on it now and like talking to different people about it, there's definitely some flaws, and I know Michael's chomping at the bit to get there.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think it's right, man. The point you just made is an important one and great. And there's something cool still seeing the characters do what they do, but I was just so exhausted by this movie. Like it has so much baggage that seeing them trying to stitch this stuff together is exhausting. Like I just was, while it exists in this weird space where they're trying to make sure they do nothing and nothing really gets moved or tied or nothing, but also just all they talk about, like I said, is that Last Jedi mirror, that like just talking about like the info dumps, the Billy backstory, which is, oh God, he was 17. He had a girlfriend. He went to high school. He was plotting an elaborate revenge murder, and he had a girlfriend on the side, like another girlfriend that he got pregnant. Like what? Like this dude is 17. Like how? Like even that withstanding is not the most egregious thing. The most egregious thing is just how deeply the snake has swallowed its own tail at this point. And I just was exhausted by all of it, cover to cover. I mean, it just felt, and I feel bad being so down on it, but the whole thing felt like utter gibberish to me. The things that they were saying, no character development, because they can't develop, because all they have to do, they just have to talk about the franchise. It's like you said, Farrell, it's like 4 and 5. The only conversations Scream can have are about Scream, like, and it's just like, what are we doing at this point? Like, even like just the weird logical stuff, like you said, the Jack Quaid age, I was like, how old are these people? The opening scene, answer me this, who attacked her? You had a phone with the one killer. You're watching her, unless you can really fake a live video phone call. You had Jack Quaid hundreds of miles away, his alibi vouched for with the other girl. Who attacked her? who did it? Like, it's impossible for either one of them to have done it. And it just like, that like set the tone. Like by the time, like at the end, when I was looking back, I was like, what? Like, it just felt like a movie where for me, nothing worked. It just like, and it was so disappointing because the people who directed, not wrote it, are the people who did Ready or Not, who a movie that I adore, which I love. Ready or Not, so playful and so smart and clever and fun. And it's just like, I expected so much more. I was like, oh man, we're gonna break and reinvent Scream with these guys. And then I was like, nope, we're just gonna do Scream again. We're just gonna go to the same well. And it's so much of like you said, Farrell, you're saying it's like the legacy characters, the meta stuff that's utterly exhausted, these new characters. Like there's just no room for this. This story is suffocated by itself, and it has to have a radical departure, or we just be satisfied that it's just going to be this, on loop now without Dewey, which is like, Gale needs Dewey, Dewey needs Gale. Like that's such a misstep if this is what it's going to be, to lose him going forward. So I was just an exercise of 120 minutes of sheer frustration. Like,
the only thing I feel like could have saved this for me was if they just kind of went full bore and did one of two or three things. Either kill off all the legacy characters in the opening sequence, or have one of, or two of, or even three of the legacy characters be the killers, because to me that's more ridiculous than the things that I've seen in this. I'm like, well, especially if you're going to start a new franchise, why are these characters still here? What is the point of Sydney being around? And I feel like it goes into this whole thing about, what a requel, I guess they call it a requel or something in the movie, where it's, they're even flipping around terms now. And it's like, okay, if it's a requel and you're actually trying to subvert expectations, why don't you have Sydney or Gale or Dewey or somebody be the killer, or, kill them all off in the first act and start fresh? I just don't understand how you don't do something like that. Maybe the studio mandated that they couldn't. I mean, I'm kind of sympathetic in that sense, because I know studio notes can be kind of a thing, but I don't know. I mean, I just don't see where they go from here that I give a shit about. I'm a completionist, so I'll probably just watch the sequels anyway, just to see where it goes. But I'm very bothered by the fact that this movie made a lot of money. I'm very bothered by this movie's rate. I don't know how it did with the critics, but I know the audience scores were very high. And I'm just like,
alarmingly
high. To me, this reminds me of Star Trek, the reboot, the 2009 J.J. Abrams movie. And my thoughts about that movie are, it's a Star Trek movie for people who don't like Star Trek. They want Star Wars, they want something else. To me, this movie felt like it was made for people like the girl in the opening sequence who hasn't even seen the originals. You know what I mean? It's like, you know what I mean? It's like, well, they like all the modern new stuff, but they have no history. And it's a problem with that culture. Really, every culture, who think that life started when they were born. You know what I mean? Like any movies that came out before they were born just don't exist. You know what I mean? And that's a problem I see with Gen Z. I mean, I don't want to be the old man yelling at clouds, but I have to comment on that, because I feel like it's just another example. It's like the girl who was, I guess, Randy's daughter,
niece and nephew. They're twins, right?
Yes, they're the twins.
And there is niece and nephew.
Okay. Okay, so she's kind of leading the sort of film nerd charge, but the great thing about the other movies, say what you want about them, is all those characters were developed. Meaning, in the first movie, Randy, he worked at a video store, so his movie knowledge wasn't just coming out of nowhere. It's a small thing, it's not big, but it's relevant, it works. In the second movie, you had Mickey. He was a film student. He was, he's going to film class. He's got that background, and so when he's talking about stuff at the end, that as a character that fits. The third movie, Roman was a film director. In Scream 4, you had the cinema club. You had these guys who You could tell that was their passion. In Scream 5, the girl who does all that sort of meta talk and requel and all that stuff, there's nothing. We don't know anything about her. So when she starts saying all that stuff, I'm like, well, where is this coming from? It's like, the reason those characters talk the way they do in the other movies is because they have that background. They have the film nerd background. Those are how those characters talk. But to me in Scream 5, she was just sort of this random person. It's like, why is this random person just talking like this when she has not been set up to be this type of person? To me, it spoke to the lack of development and the lack of care placed in these characters, to the point where they're just mouthpieces for what they're trying to do rather than actual characters.
But that's also the context. That's such a great point. That's the context also of the movie. Is like when Jamie Kenney's talking about it in 1, they're walking the walk, like they're talking about it, but they're also doing these really intelligent, fascinating things in the movie. Scream 5 is doing none of those things. So when she's talking about it, you're just talking about shit that's better than what you are in right now. So it's like, it's such a bad way to go. Like, it's so like, you're just not only just the poor development, but you're also like just pointing the audience's direction in the wrong places, where the movie's not doing what the original did. And that's the kind of, and this is what I'll come down on this movie, is like, that's the kind of heartbreaking thing, is that the Scream concept, everything that we've talked about and the cool, great things from 1, 2, 3, whatever has done, it's such an awesome concept that, like, if you just moved away from the Sydney story, if you just found a way to start it new, you don't have to reboot it. Like, it doesn't have to be a reboot, just could be a ghost faced in Texas or Maine, anywhere. Like, it's like, just do it somewhere else and divorce yourself from these characters and find a new meta commentary, which I'm certain you can. Like, you can make another great Scream movie. I am utterly convinced that you can do it. You cannot do it with Sidney Prescott in it. Like, you can't. It got to the point in this movie where they're showing Scream 8. What's his name? Jacob Quaid. They just call him he's little Pacey.
Oh yeah.
He's watching Scream 8 and like Scoface has got a blowtorch. I'm like, I'd rather watch that. Like, give me the Ghostface with the blowtorch and Stab 8. I mean, I'll watch Stab 8. Like, that looks, I like where that thing's going, but I really think that this is such a disservice to Wes and Kevin Williamson and all the intelligence and all the interesting stuff about movies and horror movies and the great movie that they made. It's such a disservice to that, because they're missing the point entirely. That is what Scream 5 is not what Scream 1 was all about. It wasn't about, it was the opposite. It was about breaking things, not retreading them, for God's sakes. And to do that and call it Scream 5 and have all these like Wes Easter eggs, like, ooh, she lived on Elm Street, and calling a guy Wes, it just feels like insulting almost, because it's like, this is not what Wes's movie was. You're missing it utterly. And I just like, that's so frustrating, but it's also frustrating because you see the opportunity, you see the greatness that you can achieve. And if you just took some risk and did it, you can make another great scary movie. And it's out there. It's just like within reach, and they're just not doing it.
Just to say something real quick, I'm sorry, Jolene, really quick. What you said about taking the Scream franchise and placing it in Texas or somewhere else, it totally fits too, because the one thing that happened in Scream 2 in the opening was you had all these Ghostface running around, because that was the point of Ghostface as a killer. He's not Michael Myers, he's not Freddy. It could be anybody. So if it can be anybody, why do you keep putting it in Woodsboro? Why do you keep centering it around Sydney? It is the perfect allegory for anybody could be the killer. So set it in Europe, I don't know, set it in Australia, set it in Texas or whatever. So that was a great point.
Yeah, I think they kind of coddled themselves with this film, because they are great filmmakers. They've shown us that they can do good stuff. I mean, they also did, parts of VHS, and that their segment in that movie is so creepy and it's so well done, and it's like 15 minutes long. But I think when you like building off of what happened in Scream 4, where we now have everything online, everybody has access to every type of information, whether you want to debate the internet is good or bad, whatever, but like, there's this fan culture that's kind of toxic and really debilitating to artists now, where it is fan service, where it's like, well, this is what they want, so this is what we're going to give them. And that doesn't, yeah, it makes you a lot of money, but it doesn't allow artists to grow in the direction that they want to grow in. So I think by having all those like Wes Easter eggs and like saying that this was for Wes, of course, yes, of course the movie was for Wes. I mean, he made the first 4. Like, obviously this is for him. But, you know, when you have I think when you have a fan culture that is so ready to have whatever they got before and they don't want anything else differently, they can't take those risks. And that's super harmful for any sort of art to progress in any way. And we're seeing that with all of these sequels and reboots now that are getting exhausting. Like, how, like, just write a new damn film. I don't, you know, I understand, like, I make movies too. Like, I understand that the process is really hard and you have to get funding and all this stuff. I'm not saying that, but yeah, like, I'm waiting for new ideas now.
No, again, I feel like it has to be done outside the studio system at this point, because even Star Wars Star Wars was a studio movie. I mean, it was financed by studio, but it was made by a renegade filmmaker, and it was made, you know, by a studio that was willing to take a chance. Because I think most studios had basically turned it down, and said, no, this is silly. What is this? Makes no sense. Even Alan Ladd Jr., the head of 20th Century Fox, didn't understand Star Wars, didn't get it, but he said, I'm going to let you make it anyway because I believe in you, not the movie. And we haven't gotten back to that. We need to get back to studios believing in filmmakers and sort of going, okay, I don't totally get this, but I'm going to trust that you know what you're doing. Now we already know what we want to make. We want you, the talented individual, to come into our fold and make what we want.
Well, that's why it's so frustrating to see like Paramount Plus do the Godfather series. It's like you're celebrating a movie that you would never make today. Never. Like, it's like, exactly. It's like, God, guys, you know?
Exactly. Well, yeah. And now it's like they would, you know, I don't know. It's like, yeah. So I feel like, especially with the thing about horror too, is horror has always been anti-studio, because, you know, once studios got a hold of them, especially with Friday the 13th franchises, because that was the first slasher that was really, I think, a big studio release. And when they see how well the first one did, especially Halloween, they said, okay, this is our template, this is our, you know, how we can make money, we're just going to keep pumping these out. So you had the slasher craze in the 80s. But, you know, most slasher movies were not big studio movies. So it's like, if you're going to reduce, or if you're going to do something different with slashers, I feel like it needs to come out outside the studios, because the studios I don't feel the studios are going to let that happen. I don't feel like they have the foresight. I don't think they trust filmmakers. I think they're just, again, like Jolene said, you know, they know there's a fan base who will just want the same thing over and over again, and that's how they make their money. And that's how Scream 5 made its money. Oh, it's Scream, it's got the opening, and it's got Gail and Dewey and Sydney, and it's got them talking about horror movies. And, you know, that's why it made money, because, and the way they did it, I'll admit, was, under the circumstances, was probably as good as it was going to get. They didn't have, I mean, Williamson was an executive producer, but who knows what that title means? It could mean anything. He did not write it. Craven did not direct it. So if you're going to make what is essentially a fan film, because what else can you do? You're not the original creator. Okay, I kind of see it as a fan film, but as a Scream sequel, that franchise is too good for me to let that off the hook. I just can't. I can't do it. So I feel like any innovations in the horror genre and the slasher genre aren't going to come from the studios. I really believe that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the future holds for slashers and horror. I'm kind of bummed out. I've been thinking, what would you do? And I have a hard time coming up with the answer, because again, it's not something you can intentionally do. I don't think you can sort of sit down and intentionally go, I'm going to reinvent the slasher genre or the horror genre. I think it just comes out of this love of certain elements that you like, and maybe other contextual elements that don't exist in that world, and you marry the two together and you create something different. So I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we have to go in a completely different direction because obviously we're not going to get pandemic films right now. Like, we're way too close to that to create something, you know, of the like but it's time and space, right? Horror reflects what's happening in our world. And what was happening in the late 70s, early 80s was a reflection of what was happening when Vietnam was projected into the home through news media outlets. And we are living in a very different culture where that has been our norm as far as news media. So I don't think there could be a true slasher resurgence like there was in the 70s and the 80s. I think now we have filmmakers that are pushing different boundaries, and I like those. I respect those, like people like Ari Aster and Jordan Peele commenting on different things that are happening internally, externally. Even like the movie Titan, and I always forget that director's name, but what she's doing. Like that's what we need. That's what we need to comment on now, because the fan service is not working. And I think people are getting, even the fans that are part of that mob mentality now, I think a few of the voices that are coming through are like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have screamed that loud, because these aren't helping our movies. They're not what we love. Like you hear Bob Gale talk all the time. He's like, Over My Dead Body, they're going to remake Back to the Future, because you can't remake that movie. Like it just doesn't happen. Like there's some things I think you just don't touch. So
Yeah, it'd be really weird, gender swap Back to the Future where a young woman is basically being hit on by her father, like I don't think that would, you know what I mean? So, and I know that Bob Gale and Zemeckis have something in a contract where the studio literally can't remake it while they're alive. I think they can't touch it. So, but I mean, people don't live forever. I feel like it's kind of inevitable they're going to do that. I just hope I'm not around when they do that, because it is one of my favorite franchises.
Same. You put me in if they do that, put me in a grave. Like honestly.
Yeah, no, it's please God, no. But yeah, no, it's just to kind of close out. I mean, just commenting on slashers in general, because it really did come out of this weird kind of 60s revolution where there was so much chaos going on with the Vietnam War and civil rights movement and assassinations left and right. That all lent itself just almost by osmosis to what turned into the slasher genre. You can't sit down and go, okay, I'm going to take this from the last decade. And it was just something that was in the air. And I think there is something in the air now with the pandemic and, recent political things and all this stuff with the craziness going on in Canada. I mean, I think we're going to look back on this era as a tipping point that led to a new resurgence or a new genre or something. I think something's going to happen. Yeah, it may not even be a slasher. It could be some other spinoff in the horror genre. Who knows? But I think that, yeah, I again, just to reiterate, I love Scream. I love the franchise. I think there's been some bumps in the road. And like any relationship, every relationship is not perfect. I'm still kind of grateful that we're getting Scream movies, even though I didn't like 5 or 4 that much. There's just something about that movie that I can't quit. Like I can't quit you, that line from Brokeback Mountain. Yeah, no, I love it. What are you guys' final thoughts on the Scream franchise?
The same, similar to, I think we'll all feel similar, like, it's a brilliant franchise that had such great beginnings, groundbreaking with in so many ways. And Scream 1 is just one of the best horror movies that there is. Innovative, smart, thrilling, well performed. It's disappointing where it's come. I mean, who knows what 6 is? Maybe they're passing the torch to the new lead. I forget her name. Maybe if they're going to do that and be like, oh, the daughter of the serial killer is now the lead. Maybe that'd be interesting. That'd be something cool. And then you could do something with that. But like, I'm always glad, like you're saying, Phil, I'm glad, not necessarily that it exists. I mean, I'm glad it exists on paper, because I'm glad to see horror with budget, the way, no, just from the trailer, like, oh, people are still giving Jordan Peele money. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't, but he got money to make that movie, which you don't often get. The Blumhouse models, is 5 million or below. It's as far below as you can go, the better. And horror that you see on Shudder is 1 million or less. I mean, the Revealer we made was less than 1 million. And it's tough, but it also gives you complete creative freedom. But it'd be nice to marry creative freedom to financial stability, not financial stability, but financial backing, and I feel like a lot has to change for cinema and for horror, because we're talking about a bigger picture here, that if you want these movies to get financial backing, they have to find a way to make that money back, which is not going to happen right now in the theatrical system, because that's just dominated by just huge movies. You can maybe squeeze a mid-level, low-budget movie in, occasionally pepper those in right now and seemingly going forward, but like until that changes and you can make millions of dollars, like you're not going to make millions of dollars streaming. No streamer is going to pay millions of dollars for a horror movie with no names, no whatever. So like, and to get names, you got to pay them. So you get this catch-22. So you need to find a way to get studio confidence where they were financing movies, like, you know, and taking new risks, like Jolene says, and that we all agree, like taking risks, doing new stuff, but also a way for them to make money. And that's hopefully by breaking up like the monopoly of just utter blockbusters that's dominating everything that makes money at the box office. So we'll see. I'm always hopeful. Things change all the time. This is what it is now. It's not what it's going to be forever. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes. I'm like you, Farrell. I'm gonna keep watching them because they're there and they're good. I mean, they are a good time. You know, they're about 2 hours and they're fun, and you know, quirks and all. They're still a good time. I like that horror is now becoming into the mainstream. Although I guess we'll see in another decade or so if that hurts or hinders, or hurts or helps the genre as a whole, because we've always been the outcast. But it would be nice to be taken seriously, but do we want to take all of that comes with being taken seriously? So I'm curious to see where they go. I hope that the guys who made this film, I hope that they don't feel restricted in these next ones going forward, however many that they decide to do. So yeah, I mean, they could go anywhere, but if there's, you know, if there's a studio behind them, we kind of could surmise the outcome, but I don't know, who knows? They might delightfully surprise us. So
Great. Well, I want to thank you guys for being here. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you all brought a lot to the table. Yeah, it's our first one. I think it went well. I really appreciate your time.
yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
we covered the Scream franchise. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I was a little worried that it would. It's funny. I had a lot more to say about 4, but then it just got to the point where almost like the movies, I was just kind of exhausted. I was like, okay, let's just move on here. Yeah, I don't know. God bless him.